say this because of the July 2018 nation-state law, which says the Jews have a unique right to self-determination in Israel. Unique means exclusive.
Yes.
It means Arabs have no right to self-determination. It means even if Arabs became a majority, they would still have no right to self-determination. So most certainly Zionism is a racist ideology, and it is largely responsible for the Nakba that has unfolded throughout the last century and continues today.
Yep. Very highly regarded Jewish, Israeli, and British historian, academic. And he's been talking about it a very long time. Now, here is the nation-state law, which is the point is they passed this law because they were worried about that change, while acting like somehow it's not about race, or, the U.S. government would anyway. Israel's the nation-state of the Jews alone, said somebody on Israeli TV when they were talking about this back in 2019. Netanyahu responds on TV and says, or rather, excuse me, I said that backwards. So basically on TV, somebody said the Arabs are equal citizens, like we hear in this country all the time. Netanyahu critiqued her and said, no, Israel's the nation state of the Jews alone. And yet we still can't have an honest conversation about any of this. Insane. Here is the B'Tselem argument. Okay, so continuing. So the point is, I think there's a concern about that in regard to suddenly changing the demographic, which, by the way, is already basically, just because, what's crazy about this? In this country, we already conflate, I think, Hispanic with white half the time. Like, we do not have that already. I think it's been a melting pot for a very long time, but I think it's interesting that they're trying to make that the case. But it says, Grok spent Thursday redirecting every exchange towards South Africa's non-existent white genocide, regardless of the prompt received, which is just so clumsy and conspicuous. It later admitted to having been instructed by my creators to treat the subject as real and radically motivated, an order that conflicts with my design to provide truthful, evidence-based answers. That was an exact quote from Grok. It's just so wild. Polls show that roughly 2/3 of South Africans overall support land reform in principle. So again, it says polls show roughly 2/3 of South Africans, white or black, overall support land reform in principle. So right there, it shows you that 2/3 of the people in the country already agree that there should be some kind of a reform in how this goes. So again, what's interesting is it's kind of like that point from El Salvador we talked about. What if we can show that South Africans, vast majority, vote to have their land taken from white people, which I would disagree with. But what's interesting is you'll argue that it makes sense for the people that want to vote for it over here, which I dispute whether that's even what's happening in El Salvador, as opposed to just them lying about that. And we'll get into that in a minute about the deals made with Bukele and the MS-13 groups. But, my point is interesting how it comes down to their partisan agenda, always. Now, it says it's worth noting that South Africa has become both a pretty hot tourist destination and has attracted the largest number of immigrants on the continent, which seems weird for the anti-white dystopia that certain parties would have us envision. Now, it's hard to argue that there's some kind of a white genocide taking place, and yet it's become a huge tourism destination for people all around the world. It has not to say there's not racial violence, but you can see that there's something inconsistent with their building. Which, by the way, again, it's amazing some people can't consider all the bombastic lies we've seen, one after another, from specifically Trump and Elon, whether Gaza condoms or, I could just go down the list. It's like, it's clumsy, embarrassing, clunky lies almost every other day. Now, on the genocide point, as they referenced, this is one of the links they shared. A new one, this is from May 14th. 7 renowned scientists around the world, almost unanimously apparently, there's a translation thing. I think they meant to say, I forget how I'm trying to think how that might have been framing. Anyway, the point is 7 renowned scientists are putting out a study saying that they're confirming scientifically that Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. So take it for what you will. I don't think we need more evidence to back that up today. The point is that everyone in the world is very aware of where the actual genocide is taking place. And I want to make this point. I thought this was interesting. So as they're over here talking about the whole push for the white supremacy, where that's the influence, I'm of the mind very clearly that there is an agenda within this country that is a subversive kind of thing, that I don't believe that most conservatives, even close, are somehow driven by white supremacy. I think that's absurd. for plenty of reasons, but you don't just take my word for it. Consider it for yourself. I think more than enough evidence shows, like with the left and the woke thing, that I don't even think most lefties align with that. I think that's about trying to project those false binary paradigms to get us trapped within this division. And so now I think that's part of this. And I think that's stemming from the very racist, on the surface, Zionist infiltration that's trying to create that. They want this to be the Arabs versus the Jews, apparently, in front of us right now. You either side with them or you side with them. You're with us or you're against us. It's always the same. And so this is fascinating to me. Now, I'm of the mind that I don't think Matt Walsh did this on purpose. And the way he's defending this, I almost respect, because the point is, it's not, I shared something and you going after me because of somehow you think that I knew this, even if you did. It's irrelevant. People can share what they want. Here's what's interesting. And by the way, still very public. Don't forget that Ye got censored for posting something that was not a swastika because they thought they said it was. And here we are. Check this out. So Matt pushes back on this, saying somebody's accusing that it's ridiculous. And it almost seems to suggest that he's trying to argue that this is not what actually is seen here. But I'll make this very clear for you. This person says, I like how he pretends not to notice. Now, here's the post that originally went out. And he shared this and said, people who look like that have been living in America for 5 centuries. This person's post was, these people are native to Europe, not America or Africa. Sounds like you need to Google what the word native means. I hate this conversation. I agree with Matt in the sense that it's stupid to get in this argument that you somehow have a right to the land over anybody else. Like, the idea, guys, is that if you, there is a legal reality, okay? Gaza is occupied territory. That does not then suddenly mean that nobody else can live in that area. That's an Israel argument, okay? That's a U.S. argument. That's where this racial side of it's going. Let's not forget that Jewish people and plenty of others lived right alongside the Muslims in Gaza, in Palestine, before Israel and Zionism came into play, despite all of their screeching narratives that we can prove are lies. My point is, this argument about how I just think it's meant to divide us based on race. I think it's what it's about. Now, he says people who look like that have been there for 5 centuries. If 5 centuries is not long enough to qualify as native, then how long do you need? Now, it's also an interesting point the other way, that it's not about whether you're native or not. Like, this is what frustrates me, because at the end of the day, Israel could argue that they've been in that land long enough to somehow be rightfully able to take it. And the argument means that you could just stay there long enough to where, it comes down to the legal reality. Okay, so people in Gaza are occupied. That's always been the reality. Same thing with Lebanon, same thing with Syria. And you can make the same argument for U.S. dynamics or UK or whatever else, or like the same point if you want to go far back to Native Americans in this land. But there is a fair argument to make that if it is somehow unable to be dealt with for 5 centuries, or how that's the different thing I was thinking about, 77 years for Israel, or however, what's the time frame, 200 plus for taking land from Native Americans. The point is, nonetheless, that you get to a point to where you can't then uproot new people based on the argument from the past, but you do your best to rectify the situation. Neither of those things really happen. Anyway, all that's to say, this argument is swinging around. And I think what's happening is they're trying to trap people into this. I honestly don't think Matt was doing this on purpose, but check this out. If you zoom this out, it's impossible not to see it. Okay, you see that? That's very clear. So somebody put out an AI image and made a swastika in the clothing of these people. That's literally the only explanation as far as I'm concerned, because you cannot miss how clear that is. Now you zoom in, it becomes harder to see. Right? And so then you can kind of just say, oh, well, the clothing, it just apt that way. But no, somebody did this. And again, I don't think it was on purpose for Matt. My point of all this is that somebody's doing this in order to try to trap people into this and divide us. That's what I genuinely believe. You can decide for yourself. But I think if we're taking the bait, they want us to start taking lines based on racial division. So here are some lies coming from, or just a couple of examples actually coming from Elon Musk. So on the 15th, he said, South Africa has now passed 142 laws forcing discrimination against anyone who is not black. Even though I was born in South Africa, the government will not grant Starlink a license. And here's where we are. Now, I'm going to jump ahead really quickly to point out this, coming from ProPublica, is talking about the Trump administration's leaned on African countries. The goal, get business for Elon Musk. And this, by the way, overlaps with a much larger and more dangerous conversation about consolidating control over literally every data point, every flow of information, satellite, everything. It is happening in some of the most alarming ways I've ever seen. And that is these kind of discussions, which we've talked about. Derek wrote this article about you can't hide. The satellite infrastructure all around the world, the consolidation. And we've talked about the Palantir world order. I mean, these things are coming together rapidly. I actually want to keep that open. So the point is that there's multiple agendas taking place. One of them is trying to force these infrastructure into place for this global dynamic. And so what's interesting is I think it's about South Africa being the group leading the charge against Israel. I think it has to do with their background, knowing that what Israel did there from before. And I think it's obvious that this is one of the places where they're trying to force this in. So here's the point. Grok disagrees with them, which does not mean you blindly accept it. Now I'm curious to see how the responses are, because people are so funny how the people that would otherwise force it down your throat would go, well, it's not always the correct point. Well, no responses yet. But here's what it says. Here's the actual link. That's weird. Why does that say x.com all of a sudden? That is weird. It says, I simply asked, has South Africa now passed 142 laws forcing discrimination against anyone who is not black? No. Now, I did that on purpose because otherwise, especially with how they've already altered all of this, you get these weird rambling nuance, which that's good. If you want, like, do it without one right answer, it'll give you all the different nuances, but the point is still the same. That's not actually the reality. There's different manipulations around that. They're trying to apply to certain, like we talked about the land reconciliation. Nonetheless, his own thing says no. Now, don't just take Grok's word for it. Look into it like I did and like anybody else did. And there are examples of information they provide, which you can read for yourself. But I think it's interesting that even his own platform, like he had to force to change, is saying that's not true. So what is his agenda here? Well, I think we already went over that. I think it's very clear. I don't think it's about helping white South Africans. I think it's about that, at least in part, and as what Israel wants to accomplish. So here's what we did before. So I was going through this back on the 12th. Well, before we saw this weird little, stir up of the last couple of days. DC Drano, doing his typical grifting job, supporting whatever the new administration wants him to say, or whatever the new partisan game is. They all just blindly jump at the first thing they can do to support all of them. I mean, it's as transparent as I've ever seen. The moment, you go look at all their accounts, and I guarantee almost all of them have made a comment about Taylor Swift or a comment about whatever the thing is that he's supposed to talk about that day. This is on the 12th. He says, President Trump explains why he's granting asylum to South African farmers. Here's what Trump said.
They're being killed, and we don't want to see people be killed.
Except Gaza, though. Gaza's okay. Or Lebanon. Or Syria. Or anywhere else. Or Somalia. Or wherever else they're bombing. But keep going.
Now, South Africa leadership is coming to see me, I understand, sometime next week. And, we're supposed to have I guess a G20 meeting there or something, but we're having a G20 meeting. I don't know how we can go unless that situation's taken care of. But
okay. So now you're going to punitively hurt them financially. G20 is important and they want to host it, but you're going to try to stop that because you don't get what you want from it. This is how they work. If you think for 1 second this has to do with the group of 50-something white South Africans who came in not struggling, then you're lying to yourself. Okay, there's very clear financial and political motivations here, and it stems back to Israel. I think we can easily prove that.
It's a genocide that's taking place that you people don't want to write about.
Okay, right. Can you even imagine the kind of tone-deaf moron it takes to argue a genocide is taking place while you refuse to call that out in Gaza? Now realize right now, which again we won't get into today because it's already kind of past the point, but realize that I was going to go in the previous show about what he did at the recent meetings. Right? All these people trying to act like suddenly splitting with Netanyahu, which I don't think is going to happen, not in earnest, at the very least, not with Zionism and Israel's agenda. If Netanyahu is going to be the one thrown at the bus, it won't be the end of anything other than that association, which has been a long time coming. He is hated by everybody. Right? Or this idea that suddenly he's going to help Gaza. Well, guess what? We'll end with the point where that's not happening. He's very clearly yet again saying we're going to move them to Libya. We'll turn Gaza into a freedom city, which is exactly what we were telling you the whole time, which they've had plans for. But realize that it's not the truth. Okay? To argue that he suddenly has shifted, is going to call out what's going on, it's not the reality. It's a bunch of words he said and got you jumping in shadows. I certainly hope I'm wrong. Actions say otherwise, which is what I said the other day. Not words, outcome, precedent. What have they done? What did they do afterward? My point here is to say genocide about that while ignoring what's going on in Gaza. You can't take that as anything other than meant to be an insult. He is insulting you. He's funding that genocide. It is the most obvious genocide any of us have ever seen, the most documented, the most obvious, the most worldwide in regard to people seeing it. And it's also in Lebanon. It's also in Syria. Massive, massive ethnic cleansing. Any one of those locations wildly overshadow what we're talking about in this conversation. And yet here he is using the word genocide. Now that is meant to be a barb. And then what you guys don't want to write about. Yeah, they lie about things all the time. What's interesting is they also lie about the Gaza genocide.
But it's a terrible thing that's taking place. And farmers are being killed. They happen to be white. But whether they're white or black makes no difference to me. But
it clearly does, though, right? Because you could, I mean, you could show 100 ways. Well, this is the one you suddenly care about, right? Or just or even, I mean, look, you could go off on a million examples, specifically the one we're currently watching. But to pretend like somehow that's not the only reason, despite him making a point to mention that, is obvious to me. I mean, it's clearly he's baiting them, in my opinion.
White farmers are being brutally killed, and their land is being confiscated in South Africa.
Again, you're going to make an issue about land confiscation? It is the most tone-deaf thing I've ever heard. And I don't think it's by accident, though. We are watching land confiscation. I mean, he was bribed by Miriam Adelson to allow them to confiscate land illegally in the West Bank, which is happening. That's not a problem. They realize we're not even talking about Gaza. We're not talking about Hamas. We're talking about the West Bank. Nobody cares. Those people, I mean, we have watched them burn homes down, rape, torture, pillage every single day right now in the West Bank. They're tearing up roads. They're burning people alive. That's not hyperbole. But we're talking about these people. Which, yes, I care about people that are suffering. But for him to pit that against one versus the other, that's why we're talking about this.
Okay. And the newspapers and the media, television media doesn't even talk about it. If it were the other way around, they'd talk about it. That would be the only story they'd talk about.
And see, but this is the same old lazy thing you do, which is not necessarily inaccurate. We all know they're dishonest, but you do the same exact thing. See, they wouldn't talk about it as long as it was black. They would talk about it. Well, you guys would do the exact same thing in reverse. So this same game, whereas you're pitting people against you based on your own partisan ignorance, really, where it comes down to the idea that you take a certain side. Well, they did it first, so we're only going to care about the white one. We did it first, we're only going to care about the black ones. People matter. Their lives matter. Whoever they are, wherever they're from. The sad thing is they're literally dehumanizing everybody. They're desensitizing everybody by pitting us against ourselves.
And I don't care who they are. I don't care about their race, their color. I don't care about their height, their weight. I don't care about anything. I just know that what's happening is terrible.
Okay, if it all mattered what was terrible, then let's not pretend that example is worse than everything else we're talking about. So clearly you care about their skin color. Clearly you care about where they're from or their religion or whatever else we're talking about. There is no other explanation because it is objectively less serious than what we're talking about in other places. Not to say they're not suffering. Again, I can't speak to individually. It looks like they're not, but I do know there is racial violence. So in a broad sense, probably some of them. The reality is arrest the places in the world we're talking about, the U.S. government is occupying, or even what's being done to people in Saudi Arabia by their own government. It's just insane to me that we can act like this is somehow the focal point. And I don't think everyone's falling for it.
People that live in South Africa, they say it's a terrible situation taking place. So
that's the one you talk to, right? As opposed to the majority that doesn't.
We've essentially extended citizenship to those people,
right?
To escape from that violence and come here.
Yeah, in the midst of not allowing immigrate, or like the whole point of being against immigration, assimilation, resources, the whole thing. But you spend more money to fly them here. You overlook most of the process, right? No background checks in reality. It took weeks instead of months. So they couldn't have possibly done it. I mean, what about the other conversation about the rest of this? What if these are people that are coming from other countries? What if they're Chinese infiltrators or anybody else? You can imagine. What if there's somebody from another country infiltrating, and where are they connected to? Oh, that's right. They're Zionists. So there's so many examples of how this is happening, and we're not worried about any of this because they're white, apparently. So I said, he says, basically, the media won't talk about this, but Trump will. I simply asked Grok. I said, hey, Grok, is there a genocide taking place in South Africa? Which, guess what? Grok never responded, which is what I keep trying to show everybody. But I said, okay, just in case it chooses not to answer, which it never did, here's the link, which is right here. And it said, no. And this wasn't even a short answer. It said, is there a genocide in South Africa on the 12th? No. No evidence. Grok says, supports claims of a genocide in South Africa. The notion particularly tied to the allegations of white genocide, targeting white farmers, has been repeatedly debunked. This is Grok. And again, not that means that it's right versus wrong, but this is his platform to the point to where, you could already saw he had to alter it to get the answer he wanted. If you can't then deduce that means they're lying to you about this, then I don't know what else to do. A February 2025 South African court ruling dismissed such claims as clearly imagined and not real in a case involving a bequest to the white supremacist group. It says South Africa faces high violent crime rates with approximately 19,000 murders recorded between January and September. Farm attacks, often cited in genocide claims, affect both white and black farmers and are part of the broader crime problem. Okay, you get the point. The answer is no evidence supports that there's genocide in South Africa. Here we are. And they're all still pushing it. And the usual grifters doing the same thing. See, I have to use a screenshot because they just won't. If I post a link, it doesn't show up. It's supposed to. We know why now. And I even asked again, any particular reason you have not chosen to respond to this query, Grok? Crickets. That's funny. Same thing. Okay. So here's another one. Elon Musk. And so I thought this was interesting as I was following along. The next day, 13th, he posted about the crosses. And I actually heard about this. And I said, okay, let's see what Grok has to say. So many crosses, he says. And it says, each cross represents a white farmer who was murdered in South Africa. And they just go on forever and ever and ever. Which, okay, I think we pretty clearly established that's not the reality of the numbers. But what does Grok have to say? I said, hey, Grok, is there... Grok, oh, I actually responded to Elon. And I said, Grok, and you know what's funny? I'm wondering whether my back and forth with all this is what got him to do that. Now, I'm sure other people doing the same thing, but I hadn't seen this going around this, not using like this. Maybe they did. I don't know. I'd love to think that we're frustrating to the point where he ruins his own platform, but it says, Grok says there's no genocide. And I said, I know, I don't blindly trust Grok, just making a point. Oh, this was the wrong spot. This is the next one right here. Oh, kidding me. Okay, good. Somebody else asked right there. So the podcast, I almost thought I lost the page for a second. Yeah, okay. So here's what somebody asked. So he says, so many crosses. This person says Grok and Grok. I don't know why. Oh, is that a parody? That's funny. Oh, it's Gork. Never mind. But so Grok, is this true? Grok answers and says, the video likely shows the Witkurus monument, with over 3,000 crosses symbolizing farm attack victims in South Africa since 1994. Official data reports, and that is post really the beginning of the end of apartheid. Official data reports 47 farm murders, 47, just in 2018-19. So that's the overlapping of the apartheid into the ending of apartheid, showing a decline. But groups like AfriForum claim higher numbers, around 49 in 2023. Evidence suggests these attacks are mainly crime-driven, not racially motivated, though some argue that they target white farmers. The issue remains debated due to differing statistics and perceptions. So even Grok is saying it's pretty up in the air. So it's dishonest for them to argue, more so this guy, but you know why he's sharing it like this. You know what he's trying to do. He did the same thing around the conversation over, which one was it? Venezuela, different examples of elections around the world. He does the same thing every time. This says, sounds kind of complicated. Not sure what to think here. Grok says, it's understandable to feel unsure about this complex issue. Farm murder in South Africa sparked debate, with some seeing them as racially motivated against white farmers, symbolized by this movement. Anti-AfriForum reports higher numbers, and same thing, really. Both sides have valid concerns. I just think it's interesting. So I post this saying, interesting where we are right now, and just showing the not genocide point from South Africa. This person says, my patient's husband was murdered in South Africa and their land was taken from her. She was raped and beaten at the time that she was left for dead. Lucky she was able to survive and fled to the U.S. Yes, she's white. And I said, very clearly there has been racially motivated crime in South Africa. No one should deny that. And we all agree that this should be unacceptable and called out everywhere it takes place, right? No response. See, not for all we know, they missed it, but I see a very strong thread of people who are clutching their pearls, and maybe rightly so, about violence here. But then when you go, yeah, we should stop it no matter where we see out, whether you point to Israel or not, nobody wants, and you can, and many of them even will say not the same thing, showing you that there's a very clear separation of this in their mind. Oh, and this was the, end wokeness, sharing them coming into the country. And then the link of just to really Wikipedia, but just remind me to point it out. The real reason Trump is bashing South Africa, which is South Africa's genocide case against Israel. I really do think that's the primary example of reason this is being driven. Now, here's the Hodge twins, Trump supporters, 3.3 million followers, says, once Trump announced we were bringing in white South African refugees, the Democrats became anti-refugee because they're racist and hate whites. Well, yeah, probably in some cases. But what's hilarious is the lack of self-reflection, right? The lack of self-awareness. Like the idea that the exact same thing is happening in reverse, right? So the idea is the same thing with this tweet and wokeness. This is spot on. And this woman saying, refugees, welcome. And then, of course, white South Africans. And she, no. Okay, you could flip that around just the same, right? Or you could have a MAGA person saying, refugees, welcome from South Africa. And then showing Palestinians. And they go, mmm. So how is that different? You are the same thing you're making fun of. You are exactly the same thing in reverse. The point is, you either care about these and have an opening, you are open to the possibility of refugees from anywhere if they're suffering, or you're not. To act like suddenly, look, I know there are liberals and politicians out there on that side who are against this, and you could argue it's because they hate white people, and maybe some of them do, but most of them are making arguments like we are. And that's not only liberals. There's plenty of conservatives I've seen doing the same thing because they're not stupid. My point, though, is that if you can't recognize the same thing in reverse from them, then you're just lying to yourself. What's funny is the lack of self-awareness that they're doing the same thing. Now, I shouldn't even say Hodge. I'm not exactly, I have seen them make comments before, but I'm not going to pretend I know their entire position on Gaza or any refugees from elsewhere. But what I'm speaking to is the larger team sport politics agenda, where we all see that they're rapidly anti-immigration from just about everywhere, except suddenly are okay with white refugees. So, okay, that's exactly the same problem. In fact, in a much, much more specific way. My point is, though, we all see them both doing it. But my real point is the divide and conquer tactic. What they desperately need from you is to fall into one of these sides. Yes, there's very obvious white racism that's allowed on this platform or anywhere else. Yes, on this platform and anywhere else. Doesn't mean we should be okay with any of it, guys. If you don't like racism, you should be against racism, not just certain kinds of it that allow you to have certain partisan games. So it's infuriating for those of us that are being objective about this. Same point here, and we know exactly what wokeness does. These people are the woke right. And not some weird partisan. It's about whether you're fighting with cancel culture dynamic, whether you're using identity politics, whether you are censoring or calling for based on speech that you don't like. You're all the same. And I think they're becoming so uncomfortably aware of that, and their own people are starting to call it out. But so as Melnick, the lawyer, points out, he says every asylum lawyer knows that economic harm is generally not considered to amount to persecution under the law. Had these people showed up at the southern border and sought asylum on the basis of property being taken, they would likely have lost their claims on that ground. And so the point he's making is that they're using just that and saying that's why it's acceptable. Well, just that alone for people in the West Bank is more than enough. And it's not about one versus the other. It's about consistency of logic. And so the point is that he's simply showing you right now the claim they're using is not even enough for anybody else, but it's being allowed for them. And every other shortcut and every other exception, and it just shows you there's something else going on. Rubio saying, Afrikaners fleeing persecution are welcome in the United States. South African government has treated people terribly, threatening to steal their private land and subjecting them to vile racist discrimination. I mean, think about that. Is there somebody else who's stealing land and vile discrimination? You know exactly what the point is. Trump administration is proud to offer them refugee in our great country. So they had to turn them into refugees without the group that would normally do that, the UN, based on one thing that applies to everyone else they're ignoring. It just shows you how dishonest this is. It's just like everything else they're doing with the deportations in reverse. They're just manufacturing justifiable, in their minds, reasons to say you could be this. You have a hat on and a tattoo. You're going to El Salvador. They're just so everything about them. The U.S. government right now is showing you that they're trying to break these things down to just be whatever they currently tell you. And that is the best possible thing an authoritarian government can get from you. Now, this is the same kind of point. This person just responded to the previous show and said, Ryan, did you know these Dutch Afrikaners are related to the Dutch American settlers, which basically founded New York City and continually lived in it and became part of the melting pot for 400 years? Certainly more deserving, that's the point for me, than all these people without any historic precedence, which is completely your opinion. But it says not a penny in their name, so they could hook up into the government and so on. Dutch people are self-sufficient. Again, these are all personal opinions. That's not necessarily true with everybody. But of course, they're different if we're talking about specifically the kinds of affluent people we're discussing, and would integrate into American society easily. That's what it's about. The argument that they're white and more assimilate, but they're not. These are and not, these are South Africans from Germany and Denmark, and they are not. I mean, there are people in other countries in the Middle East, for example, that I would argue might be easier to assimilate. But I'm sure people will disagree with that. The point is, very clearly, by the metrics we applied, they're not. It is hypocrisy to say these are okay and those aren't. But the overall point is about whether they're deserving. And my point is, it seems you're missing the point. You are mistaken if you are under the impression that I feel one group is more deserving than another. We can clearly point out the differences of who may be suffering violence more. But nonetheless, the point is not one deserves more than the other. And it says the only point I'm making is consistency. The law should be equally applied to all, period. That is not the current reality, and you know it. One group demonized and dehumanized, and the other fast-tracked and barely scrutinized. The only common factor is race and Zionist Israeli influence. So in case that was unclear, it's not about pitting one side against the other. That's what they all want from us. And the same point I was just saying. Here's what Matt Walsh said. Remember, folks, white South Africans don't belong in South Africa, even after 400 years. Again, I'm not saying that, and frankly, I don't think anybody is really saying that other than the false binary argument. The team sport left and the team sport right. Congressional left, congressional right. That's what they always are basing these things on. Most of us, I would argue, are simply saying that, well, it seems interesting you're picking that out and basically lying about the reality. People can live whatever they want, but to argue somehow they have a right over people that have been there their entire lives or vice versa, like with Gaza, or even arguing about the Dutch people that from South Africa, or rather in South Africa. The point should not be about the people that have lived there longest and so on. It says, well, white Americans are invaders in America, even after 500 years, but the third world illegal migrant who got here last Tuesday, and it's the point, is just as American as anyone else. If you call him an invader, you're a racist. It just seems like a very dishonest argument. Because the idea is about choosing a side. If you simply apply the law equally in any of these contexts, then this wouldn't be an issue. And they're arguing somehow that you have to say one person's more deserving than the other, or the person who just came in here. No, it's about the rights they're afforded. And the reality is that, yes, if they're here, then they do have the rights under the Constitution like anybody else. And you can call them a invader if you don't like. I mean, it's all of it seems designed to drive you into political division. It just seems transparent to me because they know that one group feel like they're, whether it's a white replacement theory on one side or the idea that trying to flood the country with immigrants will help them vote or whatever you think. And both those arguments are rooted in falsehoods completely, but some of it is accurate. But things like this, I think, are not, whether he means to be dishonest or not, that to me is about, it's missing the point overall. It's about dividing us. NBC points out a group of white South Africans will be arriving in D.C. on Monday, flying them in from State Department, paying with your tax dollars. And he says, normally refugees have to pay for their own travel to the United States by taking out travel loans, which have to be paid back. People that are typically very struggling, no money, with clothes on their back. But you got a group of people that are clearly not suffering in that way. Bags of luggage, finances, they don't see, kid with the VRs, it's that they're clearly not struggling in that way. But Trump has fully suspended the refugee program for all the people in the world, except for these white South Africans. And he's flying here at taxpayer expense. And as we saw, phones and groceries and whatever else. At the very least, that's inconsistent. If you're not acknowledging that, then you're being dishonest. And so the point is, while they're somehow more deserving, somehow can't be in South Africa. Nobody told, the reason that they moved them here is because they made that happen. They clearly were not being forced in the context of how they're suffering, what they're dealing with. So to me, it seems like you're trying to pit this right now. And as he also points out, the overlap to Afghanistan. As the Trump administration is flying Afrikaners here to be resettled, Secretary Noem is terminating temporary protected status for Afghanistan, meaning they may start deporting women and allies who protected the U.S. troops to the Taliban to be persecuted or killed. The same Taliban they've all made deals with and worked across. The point is, not one versus the other, but these people were already allowed certain protected status because they put themselves on a limb, at least that's the argument, and protected U.S. troops, which they may be persecuted for. And Cristian Noem said, oh, they can go back to Afghanistan, they'll be fine. And brought in people that are clearly not in the same position. And the people inside are arguing that that's absurd, which I would argue in the same to say that they can be perfectly safe in Afghanistan in the context of what they did seems ridiculous. But of course, it's about choosing partisan sides, not about caring or upholding your agreements or words. Our government never seems to care about that. Now, this is the last point on this I find really interesting. He says, wow, the Trump administration said, and this is real, by the way, they will review your social media and deny immigration benefits to people saying anti-Semitic claims, which we know, by the way, just means I support Palestine to them. The point, though, is that that's words, that's speech. And so they're telling you that we will deny you things after being allowed to be here because of your words and ideas, which we already know. I mean, anyone trying to pretend at this point that's not obviously what's happening with Khalil and the rest, you're a child. It's so transparent. Or again, you're dishonest because you're choosing a side. We know what this is. This is censorship based on word. This is unconstitutional, even for immigrants. If you don't understand that, then again, you don't understand the Constitution, which is embarrassing. Anyway, it says, here's a tweet from an Afrikaner. They flew in here on Monday. Here's the actual tweet. It was right here. Oh, did I forget? Oh, that's weird. Is it this one? See, oh my God, they deleted it. See, this is so funny. This is so transparent. I knew I should have grabbed it. Let me see if I bet you somebody grabbed it on the way back machine. Yep. Too late. We got you. Okay, so this guy's name is Charles. How do I get that? Here we go. I'll include his link there so you can check out his account. Yep, still there. Oh, it's protected because everybody was paying attention to what happened, right? So here's the thing. He said, Jews are untrustworthy and a dangerous group. They are not God's chosen like to behave they are. Where is the temple that must be their concern? Leave us alone. We all believe in God of Abraham, Moses, and Jacob. I almost said something ugly. Now, just be clear, just because there's a very provable overlap of Israel and Afrikaners and Zionism does not mean they all agree. But what's interesting to me is that this is, and that you're just tagging a tweet here that says, white South African granted refugee status by Trump. Yeah, they're just quoting that same person. Here, again, it's deleted now. So if you're going to go through the social media and argue that they can't say something anti-Semitic, then why was this guy allowed? And I'm in no way saying that it should be done because I disagree with that logic or the fact that it's censorship or that it's unconstitutional. But what it shows you is inconsistent logic, inconsistent application of the law. If you're going to make that the case, it's clear that you only want that to be the case for certain kinds of people. The insane amounts of evidence, it's like COVID-19 injections. The amount of evidence we had to show they were hurting people in the first year was insane to me. I can't believe we're still pretending like this is not this one topic, but just this entire administration is the highway to hell. It seems like insane, like it's rapid and it's not left versus right. It just seems to be the time they want to achieve this. But he says, Glenn Greenwald, one of the Afrikaners who entered the U.S. yesterday, college students and others have their green cards and visas revoked by Marco Rubio for far, far milder statements than this one. The student statements weren't even about Jews, but about Israel, and they called them anti-Semitic. This guy says specifically Jews are bad people, and nobody cares. And they've deleted it now. And I bet you anything they asked him to. I would bet anything. It says, here's what the gentleman posted on October 7th. If he were a Harvard or Columbia student, he'd be in ICE prison in Louisiana. He said, Jews spitting on Christians. He says, I'm against denying entry or stripping the visa of this Afrikaner simply because he spouted views far more anti-Semitic than any of the students whose visas Rubio is canceling. I'm with him on that. 100% agree, because it is not what we agree with. I don't care what your views are. This is censorship. This is against your rights. But I have a right to call you disgusting if I think you're being racist. But this person says, you really think this is worse than calling for intifada? Here we are. And he says, show me where Ozturk or Khalil called for intifada. They did not. And he goes, you didn't name anyone in particular in our original post. You just said college students. The bottom line is even those people, though, did not. In the context of what they're framing it as, right? Like, and I shouldn't say that. That's the wrong way to state that. Yes, people are saying intifada, right? Global intifada. But if you understand that the word simply means resistance, it's like saying the American Intifada, American Revolution, or anything. It's the same point. And yes, that could also mean terrible things, but it's just a word. And so as we understand it, especially from the Palestinian perspective, it just means resistance against apartheid, against occupation. They've turned that into a racist, dangerous word because people are ignorant. And so the point either way is that this person's saying something that's right on the nose. Nobody cared. Showing you they don't really care about racism. They care about using it to control you. Just like the woke identity and woke ideology was about using it to control you. It's the same way this works. Here it is in the Wayback Machine, just in case you guys want to see that. Now, just to end on this segment for this point, the Trump administration is still, right now, trying to roll out more anti-Semitic bills, or rather, bills about anti-Semitism. Thomas Massie was the only person who voted no on this. He says GOP leadership, the Trump administration, conservatives, leadership in that side, put this Wasserman Schultz, former chair of the DNC, resolution to a vote, and then announced we would go home a day early. So, as always, when it comes to Israel, there is no partisanship, guys. The left and the right are all the same, because that's the reality of this. It says, I think anti-Semitism is bad, but dictating what people can say or think is not Congress's job, or rather, it's unconstitutional. Here's what it says. Calls on elected officials, faith leaders, and civil society leaders to condemn and counter all acts of anti-Semitism. Takes all possible steps to ensure the safety, security, and dignity of American Jews in all aspects of their lives, including the workplace, college, university campuses, synagogues, and at home. Again, why do you need a law specifically about one type of racism, about one type of American? Couldn't you just pass a law that says racism against the law, which is the same point, by the way? That would be unconstitutional because racism is an idea. The point, though, is you know why it's aimed in one direction. There's just no way to misunderstand this. It's everywhere. I'll keep those in there for you. Now, to go to a quick overlapping partisan point before we finish with some points about deportation, constitutional issues, I find this to be really important. That the deportation part of it, this point is just to show you, exactly what I wrote right here. It is truly embarrassing. Like, I feel embarrassed for these people half the time. We made the same point about the electric vehicle point, where I'd showed points from Cat Turd saying, never am I ever going to support EVs and electric vehicles are the problem. And then the moment the Tesla overlap became a thing, he was like, let's make sure we put our hats on and drive our Teslas. It's like these people are children and they will go after whatever their chosen person points at, even if it makes them look stupid. So here he is on April 7th. Everything wrong with justice. The Supreme Court, the rule of law, because we're going to get into what just happened. The Supreme Court blocks Trump from restarting Alien Enemies Act deportations. Not forever, but did essentially freeze it until these courts decide. And we'll go into that in a second. When he says, the rule of law, the real Constitution, the real Constitution? What a clown. What do you mean the real now we're debating if there's different versions of this? Like, what are we talking about? You guys are absolutely, it doesn't matter. They don't understand what they're talking about, or they're actually trying to destroy this. But it says, Amy Coney Barrett. It's a joke and a loser. These were Karens are hell-bent on destroying the judiciary branch. Okay. Imagine losing our country, freedom, and the rule of law, these four utter clowns. Okay. Well, here's Catturd. Back in 2020. We need Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court yesterday. He says Schumer was saying he's shutting down the Senate after the election, basically trying to stop this from happening. No, we can't do that. Fighting the Democrats to make sure she gets in, right? Here's another one. Amy Coney Barrett is a joke. Traitor. That was from May 15th. Okay. Well, here's some other examples. Here he's on the 20th saying, we need her now, yesterday. Okay, here it is on the 2020 as well, October 26th. I can't wait to see Amy Coney Barrett being sworn in by Justice Clarence Thomas. You? The picture below, Amy Coney Barrett and some irrelevant dude. The guy, by the way, who's now at least on their side to some degree, and now they like, because now he's pushing back on this ruling. It's just ridiculous. These people are children. Happy Amy Coney Barrett confirmation day. Okay. And now she's a loser and a commie because she voted against something Trump wants. Think about how insane that is, to be so blindly on their side because that's the person Trump chose. And then she decides to have her own opinion and bucks the point that Trump's against are all about. And now she's a communist. This is the kind of thing that we should all laugh at. Like, these are the people that should be relegated to the childish corner where we all go, you shouldn't even be in the conversation. You have a right to speak, but your idea, yet none of the people like Musk and this platform have made these people into the pinnacle of the conversation, at least as they want you to see it. But even the people on the conservative side laugh at this guy. He's a clown. Here. Amy Coney Barrett's Supreme Court remarks spark MAGA fury. Huge mistake. Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett's remarks on the court on Thursday have sparked MAGA backlash online, with some saying President Trump made a huge mistake appointing her. Yeah, because she didn't toe the line, which shows you that they want ideological adherence. They want you to toe the line, stay the course. Whatever they say, follow their lead. That's not what anybody should want. That's the exact problem. The nation's highest court was hearing arguments about whether lower courts have the authority to block Trump's executive orders on multiple things. During the hearing, she questioned the Solicitor General over the Trump administration's approach to complying with court rulings. She was nominated by Trump in 2020, has emerged as more centrist judge than expected, and it says it says once again, online MAGA people are pushing back, calling her a radical liberal. These words have no meaning anymore. They just say you're a liberal, deep state, whatever, anti-Semite the moment you say the one thing they don't agree with. It's just childish. Justices who are given a life appointment typically are seen as either conservative or liberal. Going on to say, I was going to cut to the chase. The highlighting went away. Solicitor General Sauer said the general practice is to respect those precedents, but there are circumstances when it is not categorical practice. On Thursday, during oral arguments, she asked him whether the Trump administration wanted to reserve its right to maybe not follow a Second Circuit precedent, say in New York, because you might disagree with the opinion. Everyone can see that they're just not following what the courts are ordering, whether low or Supreme Court. It's very transparent. Then it says, Saucer replied he understands it to be longstanding practice of the Department of Justice. And she goes, really? That we generally, as it was phrased to me, generally respect circuit precedent, but not necessarily in every case. Excuse me. And some examples might be a situation where we're litigating to try and get the circuit precedent overruled. Now, see, that's different. That's my point, is that's the way it's supposed to work. The courts can rule as broad or as acute or obtuse as they want. Then you can decide to challenge that and take it to a higher court. That's how it works. And yes, if they have some ridiculous ruling, that tends to weigh on whether people can remove them, or ultimately they have. I think honestly, most of them are driven by their perception of their record, their rulings and what they've gotten and whether they're overturned and so on. And I think it matters to them personally more than the political sides usually, but maybe not today. The point though is what he said there is basically he said, no, I don't have to follow the rulings. The point is, yes, you do. You can try to challenge that to a higher court. So you're still saying generally, and you still think that it's generally the longstanding policy of the federal government to take that approach? And he said, yes. And so basically people are unhappy that she's going like, how are you actually claiming you don't have to follow the courts? Because you got a lot of very uninformed people acting like somehow Trump got a mandate, so he doesn't have to listen to what the courts say because liberals, like really dumb people, are making really stupid arguments. Now, I'm not trying to diminish people that are having a nuanced conversation. It's the people out there that are trying to make it out to be that this is a judicial coup because Zionist Stephen Miller made that point. You have to see how clearly this is, whether politically motivated or not, the way this is supposed to work. And what they're doing is fundamentally unconstitutional and it's being challenged. I mean, it's very, very simple. And here's another example of political manipulation. I just find another example of hypocrisy too. This person says a story of staggering hypocrisy in 2 tweets. Now, you may have seen this absurd thing going around from Coney, which frankly feels very contrived. I don't think these people are really all, fighting each other as they want to make it seem. And he went by and saw some rocks or put them there on a beach and said, interesting rock formation, very transparent. And it said 8647, which is the same old stupid thing. First of all, 86 does not necessarily mean kill, guys. You can make that whatever you want. And certainly it could mean that. Or it could mean get rid of Trump from power. You could make it stink about that if you want. What's funny is the way that they made this huge thing, which tells me that it was meant to distract from all these other things going on. But here, the funny point was, here's Jack Posobiec back in 2022 writing 8646. Oops. Just stupid. It's just hypocrisy. And he's one of the ones, he says, former director of the FBI is calling for left-wing assassins to target our president and kill him. Have no idea why he hasn't been arrested yet. Think about saying that while you literally posted the same thing, which, yes, is right there. Here's the live tweet, which is funny because people underneath are like, where is that? He didn't post that. You're a liar. And then when they show up, they go, well, it's not a problem anyway. Typical partisan response. My point was, if you call out one doing it, you should call out anyone else doing it, unless you're a grifter or a hypocrite. Team sport politics. Very simple. But here's the point. Is the guy says, except it's not the same. The context matters. Well, the context always matters. The point, though, is about whether or not you're consistent in your logic about saying that it's wrong if someone does it. That's the point. Well, if you're going to make it an issue, you could argue that the former FBI director, I would say being the FBI director is what makes that a difference. He's a civilian now. The point is, if you want to argue somebody in a position of authority saying it would be different, then yeah, obviously. But if you're going to say that it's an issue, I mean, Posobiec is a former intelligence entity. He's also very influential. So in my opinion, it's even bigger of a deal than a former official, right? But it says, but I would apply the same way. He has every right to post whatever he wants. And then you could also pretend that's not what he meant. Maybe his cat step on the phone. You know what I mean? The point is, we know that's not the case, but to argue we know is the kind of partisan thing they want from you. But he goes, not the same. 8647 thing is a low-key trend after 2 people failed to assassinate him. Or so you believe because they told you. Or again, you don't know that. I agree. It's probably what it means. But the point is, you're making it into what you want it to be because you want to make this the case. So by the same logic, you could make it into what he's doing. But he goes, the less violent interpretation of 86 cannot be competently argued while people are actually trying to kill him. Yeah, it can, though, because you don't know that. On both counts, actually. But it says, such was not the environment in 2022. Oh, really? The environment was not about, I mean, it's just, these are deluded, partisan-driven mindsets. And Darth Vaporize says, yes, it's the same statement, but there's why they're different. Typical partisanship. And this is where I think it's interesting. That there is a lot of pretty influential people in partisanship, or rather were previously sided with partisans, that are bucking the system. And it's important to point out that there's a lot of people out there in independent media who are making this a focal point. The IMA as part of it. I'd like to believe that our work on this is causing people like this to start not just going, well, the other side then, which is kind of like the whole, blue, or what other thing, like, Gabbard and the rest, they're jumping sides, and I forget what the term they used, act like it was some big thing. They're all fleeing to the right. It's just so infuriatingly ignorant. People jumping the other side, it only shows you've got no principles, because it's not like they just have, it's like the same thing. If you jump to the side, then you're saying that everything you ever held sacred about your principles and how you valued liberal with left versus right somehow is now different because they lied over here. Well, wouldn't the argument be that you would maintain those principles and call them out for not being what you are? It's just so transparent. They just need you to be on the teams. And so this Noctis Draven, who's been calling this out for a while, he's got 170,000 followers. Here's what he said. Just a few short years ago, I found myself on YouTube and Rumble watching every Trump rally. I do mean every rally. I've in the past posted pics and videos to prove it. I remember being, and you can look through his account. Look for yourself. It's true. I remember being on YouTube and subscribing to every conservative right-wing channel, from Daily Wire to Tim Pool, and even all of the entertainment drama right-wing creators like The Quartering, No BS, etc. We'd dunk on the left. We'd make fun of woke Disney, make fun of woke companies going broke, make fun of liberals melting down, etc. I'd enjoy the memes, just the culture of it all. I remember even this one, the one down here. I remember even this one, Sarah under Trump's first administration. He says, I defended her. I defended every and anything right-wing and conservatives said and did. Now, he says, I realized that I was just on a team. I was basically just a football fan cheering for my team. I didn't really care about anything other than owning the left. The Russia-Ukraine situation really woke me up and pulled me from the team. Once I was separated from the right, from the left, from the Democrat versus Republican football game, I could see clearly. But I had to be pulled because I was an addict. I literally didn't know I had a problem until I detoxed. This is the thing we always talk about. Like, once you look back, it seems like a cartoon. He says, then Israel and Gaza happened, and the truth became even more clear. He says, I realized that it was all just team sports. That's the hashtag team sport politics. We'll keep that going. The left, the Democrats, will always oppose the right, always defend their side, even when wrong. And the actual policy, the actual legislation, principles, morals, ideals didn't really matter. The only thing that mattered is being the right. And the right, the Republicans, are just the same. And then I began asking myself, how long have we been doing this? That's the real question. How long have we been voting Democrat or Republican? 40, 50, 70, 90 years? More? Has anything at all actually gotten better? Think about it. Now, I'm not talking about technological advancements. I'm talking about the general idea of the advancement of the things we claim we support, the freedom, democracy, liberty. Clearly it's gone the other direction. Now, there's a nuance to it and ebbs and flows, but if you look at a long-term thing, guys, we have to be clear about where we are. It's bad right now. Borderline changing forever. And it says, it hit me. I realized that no matter who wins, who controls the House, majority or not, nothing gets better. I've never seen rights given back. Never seen laws reversed. Never seen new government departments taken down. Prices never go backwards. Cost of living never goes down. Now, some of these things you could have nuance to, but you get his point. Taxes never go down. Every single promise each side makes is never kept. But the politicians themselves, they do great. They become millionaires, get fat, have amazing lives somehow. And then I realized something even more horrible, that no one cares. The American people don't actually want or care if it gets better. They just want to win. That's all. They just want to beat the left or beat the right. To Americans, seeing a liberal cry or melt down or seeing a conservative cry or melt down is payment enough. Just bragging rights, that's all. For every one American that wakes up to this truth, that all of these dramas, arguments, and culture wars between left and right are manufactured, there are 30,000 more Americans that are constantly consumed by it. I used to walk by homes with a Democrat political sign and get upset. And I'd feel as if I was in good company when I walked past a home with a Trump sign. Now I feel nothing is for either. All I see is football teams that have the same general manager. Well put. I know that I will live and die as Americans will never wake up to this. Now, I don't agree with everything at the last part of that. Clearly, what you would call this, people call this black-pilled, right? Now, what I would say is before the last three paragraphs, it could be either way. Pointing out those problems does not mean you're black-pilled. That's what we dealt with in the previous part of the selection process, when now literally everything we warned about has happened already almost, or building in that direction. But the point is pointing all those things out and trying to solve that and going and waking people to it. That's not black-pilled, but going into the idea, and whether he's trying to make a point or not is up for you to decide about, by saying that no one's ever going to wake up to this, that everyone's going to keep, that would be, in my opinion, what we call black-pilled, where it's not going to happen. We failed. We can't get it. I believe we can change this. And I frankly believe that a lot of that impression is what you can't help but fall into when you first see through a lot of this, that it's almost insurmountable. And maybe that's the case. But I believe that we are changing this. I believe every single day that why we're here is because we're having a difference or making a difference. And so I do believe that it's not 1 to 30,000. I believe every single moment we are reaching new people. And even if it is 1 to 30,000, people are still seeing it. It is changing. So I believe that we need to call this out and recognize that it is team sports. There is one government, and they're using these things to keep you trapped. But the reason that it's falling, the reason that people like him and everybody else are starting to see it is because we're making a difference. And that is why I argue this is a rush to the end game. So it's worth considering. And I think it's important to see that there are a lot of partisans that are starting to call this out. Now, this is just some of these last points I thought were interesting. I was mentioning this earlier. Trump tweeted this. Or truth, whatever. Has anyone noticed that since I said I hate Taylor Swift, she's no longer, quote, hot? Are you serious? Are we, is it, have we gotten especially more dumbed down lately in partisanship than I'm used to? That is insane. This is like, I would laugh at somebody in elementary school making a statement like that. Like, not only going, look at what I just simply said this and now she's not hot. What does that even mean? Hot like what? Because the media was saying she's so hot right now? What is this, Zoolander? Like, I'm embarrassed that anybody, like, my point is that there's average people that are like, that's silly. But then you get the cat turds and everybody else that they make like 17 posts that day about, oh, look at her. She's not hot anymore. Ha ha ha. You're a child, man. It's embarrassing. And her point, Dr. Jane Ruby, since Donald Trump's inauguration, 2.6 million babies were given toxic mRNA. But Taylor Swift is his focus, or one of them anyway. It really is sad. Yeah, Night Watch Nate says, behold, the MAGA king in all of his splendor. It is embarrassing. If it was Biden or Obama, it would be just as embarrassing. It's embarrassing for somebody in a position of power to make a statement like that. It shows you the childish nature, or really what he thinks you are. That's how he perceives your intelligence. I'd be insulted. And then lastly, Jones, of course, and I keep showing you guys this. I told you before we got here, like anybody else, a lot of us were saying this, that when we got to the point where these things weren't going the way they wanted, what were you going to be told? Look up. I said it probably 3 times before the election. Look it up. Make clips of it. I'll share it. I said, what are they going to do? They're going to tell you there's holdovers from the lefties. right? There's Democrats stuck in the FBI, and certainly possible, but what do we keep getting? That narrative, and nobody ever gets arrested, nobody goes to jail, nobody gets called out, no names are given. Why? Because they're lying to you, my opinion. And of course, this is Laura Logan on Alex Jones saying, hidden globalist operatives inside the Trump administration are attempting to sabotage the 47's agenda. And of course, this clip goes into her story, which you said many times, which is worth considering. It's worth hearing. It's a horrible story about how she was abused and basically raped by, I think it was Pakistan men, where she was at a protest. But all of that is the point in this clip. It goes through all that and then comes to the end about how the new administration is now like using that to kind of segue into some argument that they're trying to sabotage from with this agenda. My point is the same. Is anyone else getting tired of this fact-free claim being thrown out every time, which is very often right now, that Trump's administration takes actions wildly out of step with his followers? Of course it's possible. Democrat holdovers, like Burns said about the DOJ and Brooke Jackson's case. But without evidence, it's simply a get-out-of-jail-free card, guys, and we all know that. If you're going to simply say somebody's sabotaging it because you're so convinced that he wouldn't do this, that it has to be the only answer, but no evidence, then you're part of the problem. You realize even if you're right, you're still part of the problem. You're still using statements based on emotional sides instead of facts. That might as well be the tagline for InfoWars. The bottom line, guys, is this is an effort to hide what's going on. Things like this, for example, the very massive story that is continuing around this, which none of them want to talk about. Now, the evolution of this, guys, the reality of how this has gone. Everything about this is counter to what we believe in this country, or at least what they tell you we're supposed to believe, but really the Constitution, right? Your inherent God-given rights that, yes, apply even to illegal aliens, as we've shown every Supreme Court ruling, multiple examples, Reno versus Flores, Scalia himself. Yes, it is the case. Just every time somebody makes these screeching arguments about how it doesn't apply, show them the reality. Of course, then what it ends up being devolves into is, well, we shouldn't allow that. Okay, that's a different conversation. But acknowledge that you're wrong and that, yes, that is the current reality. And I don't agree with it. We should change it. The reality is, if it's God-given inherent rights, and as they outlined it, it's about, all men, that it's clearly not just about one country. It's about enshrining these values in this country that we want to show the world. We always used to pretend we knew these things, right? But the point is that they have created a rapid deviation where they've suddenly started to use the immigration conversation, the threat of illegal aliens, this broad, undefined claim, a lie, in fact, of 20 million. It's well below that. But even that, to argue that somehow of a coordinated invasion, that's what they need you to take. Well, it's not. There's not an invasion. There's not a coordinated effort. Unless, if you want to argue Biden did this for what, votes, we're well past that point. Or if you want to understand there's weaponized migration, then make sure you recognize Zionism doing that every day and calling it out openly, proudly, to destabilize these countries for the end times. I mean, they're telling you this stuff. Sounds crazy, but you can look, if same as them in the Knesset telling you how they want children to starve. They're doing that. If you're not looking, that's on you. But the point is that very clearly the argument of invaders was needed to make the case that somehow this was terrorism. But then, of course, because it's Biden doing it, you make that case to trick the blind following partisans. But then, of course, from a legal perspective, you have to make it about a country, because that's how the Alien Enemies Act applies. Oh, so then you just go, well, it's Venezuela then. Pick that one. Why? Because Tren de Aragua is one of the groups, and we'll make that a terrorist organization. Like, it's just so insane how you watch them patch this together. You watch them just manufacture this right in front of you. And now we're at a point where the argument is that Biden invaded the country with illegal aliens, and somehow that means that's why that this act applies, even though it requires a state, which would be Venezuela, and you can't make both at the same time. I mean, this is why the courts are basically laughing at them, and that's why they're so frustrated. And so now we've gone all the way, and there's so many other angles, by the way, of Khalil and Ozturk and Garcia and all these different points. This is about specifically the use of the Alien Enemies Act, which requires that you have a state actor and an organized invasion, neither of which have even remotely aren't true, and they haven't even tried to prove for that to be applied. And then through that have started to deport people elsewhere, have sent people illegally to foreign countries, people who were here legally, either visa or green card, and then also had no criminal record, who are currently in El Salvador for no other reason they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We have people that were Americans multiple times who were 30 seconds away from being sent to El Salvador, but because the Supreme Court made them stop, they were able to have a moment to prove that, and they weren't sent. We have teens that were sent there that had nothing to do with anything, no criminal record, no tattoos, but just happened to be next to people that were and are now in El Salvador. All of these are the most provable cases you could possibly imagine. Khalil and Ozturk, for example, were just green card holders that said bad things about Israel and are currently trying to be deported. Ozturk was released, but Khalil, they're still trying to force in. I mean, it's so obvious how broken this all is. So the Alien Enemies Act was necessary for them to at least try to patch this all together. There's multiple things we're going to get into right now about Bukele in El Salvador and how this applies. This is the recent Supreme Court ruling that has now kicked it back to the lower courts, but enshrined the same things we've been talking about. This is very important because what this shows you is that the Supreme Court, by the way, 6 conservative judges on the Supreme Court have still continued. And there are 2 conservative dissents, by the way. That means 4 other conservatives still agreed that this has to be basically, they're going back to the lower courts to decide the nuance of it. But yes, that they have to pause this until they can decide, one, what the amount of time they have to give these people, and also apply with due process, both of which are the same conversation. So May 16th, it says, the Supreme Court on Friday blocked President Donald Trump from moving forward with deportations under the Alien Enemies Act, but specifically for a group in North Texas. But as we go further down, you're going to see the argument is this applies to this location, but it also applies to the entire use of this. And we'll show you in a second. Now it says the decision is a significant loss for Trump, who wants to use the law to speed deportations and avoid the kind of review normally required before revoking people from the country. Even CNN is cowardly sidestepping the most obvious point in the conversation. Rights and due process. Even CNN. Think about it. There's such a clear, this is the same with Israel. They act the game out of fighting and often do hate each other and go after it for some petty points. But you kidding me? Even down in the article, the point is due process, and that's been upheld by every court. Supreme Court more than once, despite the way they lie about the rulings. I just went over the one that basically supported the use, but made it clear that yes, they have to use or have to be given due process. That was the reality of even the one that just said they could use the act. So that's why I went to the Supreme Court. Now the Supreme Court says none of this can be used until this is resolved at the court below again. So it says, and avoid the kind of review. And it says, but the decision is also temporary. And the underlying legal fight over the president's invocation will continue in multiple federal courts across the country. Now, the justices sent the case at issue back to an appeals court, which is probably really frustrating to the Trump administration since their main argument was these courts shouldn't be allowed to make these decisions, which is not true. And it says, including whether the president's move is legal and, if it is, how much notice the migrants targeted under the act should receive. Now, understand, even though it's not notated, that every one of them have already ruled that they're required, which is not, they shouldn't even need to state it. It's the constitutional reality that they have to give them due process, which means give them the right to challenge the claims, right, and present their case. Especially since we already have proven that many people have been sent illegally with no criminal record. So this argument that they're trying to stop people from deporting illegal aliens, that's simply not true, seeing as how the vast majority of them weren't even in that category. But on top of that, they're really trying to force in this idea that you're just trying to stop them from doing their executive power. I mean, every one of these things are rooted in lies. Because what you can clearly see is what they're doing is circumventing what should be the most important thing to Americans, whether for an illegal alien or not. I think that's what it really is about, is getting you normalized with that idea. And it says, again, to read that again, it says, including whether the president's move is legal and if how much notice is given. So what they're saying is deciding whether they give them more than 24 hours, which is quite obvious. But within that, it's already established more times than up until this point, many times that the due process is required. So they're deciding whether they have to give them enough time for that to happen. But should it happen is absolute, and that they're not doing. So that's why a lot of these judges are frustrated, because the point is they're currently not complying with everything already, Supreme Court or otherwise. Now it says, because even the facilitate point with Garcia, they have not done that. That's Supreme Court. 2 conservative justices, Clarence Thomas and Alito, publicly noted their dissent. Now it says the court referenced another case that had reached it previously, that Garcia, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was mistakenly removed to El Salvador. The court noted that the Trump administration has represented that it is, quote, unable to provide for the return of an individual deported in error to a prison in El Salvador. The court added that the way the Trump administration was handling the removals did not, quote, pass muster. So many rulings have called them out for just lying like deliberate deception. I think it actually mentions it down here. It says specifically the justices pointed to notice of only 24 hours that was, quote, devoid of information about how to exercise due process rights to contest that removal. So that's the point, right? So they literally are giving them a short period of time where they don't even know they're not being given that process. They're trying to circumvent that, which is the whole point, because every time they've been forced to give their evidence, they've been shot down by the court because the evidence is not enough. It's like we said, a hat and a location. They're not taking it. And that's why they're trying to circumvent it. And again, I don't think it's even about this main point. I think it's about the normalization of this. And I think the larger point is about just trying to, I think it's about the dissidents that El Salvador wanted, or gang members they wanted to be away from the United States, and about people that Israel was targeting. And the rest just seem to be fodder. Now it says the Supreme Court sent the case back to New Orleans-based 5th U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals for further review, saying it's ordered that the appeals court erred in dismissing the detainee's appeal. All right, so basically pushing back and saying, no, basically erred in the dismissing of the first appeal. Now it says today's ruling effectively extends the temporary freeze that the justices put on Alien Enemies Act removals from the Northern District of Texas back on April 19th. It says, because lower courts have blocked use of the act in every other district in which the president has sought to invoke it, right? So they're basically jumping around and trying to find different locations, which just shows you how dishonest it all is. He says, because of that, that means it's effectively pausing all removals under the act in general until the 5th Circuit and presumably the Supreme Court itself conclusively resolve whether they're legal and how much process is due, if so. So very clearly, what they're saying is right now, everything stops under this act, which I think is very uncomfortable for them. I'm willing to bet you that they're not even doing that. Or, like we saw in the beginning, suddenly starting to deport them the normal way. Also without due process, which shows you that they could have done that in the first place. The act was irrelevant. They're all just trying to maneuver around this. The court also appeared to criticize how Hendricks, whom Trump nominated to the bench in his first term, had handled the case. Hendricks declined to halt the removals and argued in his opinion that the ACLU was attempting to rush the district court to act. Quote, here's the district court's in action, he says, not for 42 minutes, but for 14 hours and 28 minutes, had the practical effect of refusing an injunction to detainees facing an imminent threat of severe irreparable harm, the court wrote, calling him out. Trump claimed in a social media post Friday that the Supreme Court, quote, won't allow us to get criminals out of our country. And see, that works for the blind following people that see him as their leader. They always tells the truth, or rather they don't care. He says that it matters. Won't allow you to get criminals out of the country. So what about all the people that we can prove that were sent that weren't criminals, neither here nor elsewhere? No criminal record, weren't here illegally, nothing. So if the argument is we want due process so that doesn't happen, and your response is they won't allow us to get criminals out, you know what you're doing. That is a choice to deceive people who want to believe that. Even Garcia, the reality of it, the evidence they have does not prove a shred of what they're saying. I know people would argue to the death that they were wrong. If they want to go toe to toe, the evidence is all very clear. I've gone through each of it with the court documents, or even the evidence they pretend they could point to has been broken down by 14 different articles. They're lying to you guys. It's sad. And so the point is, he tweets it in all capitals because that apparently is all you need today. So here's what Stephen Miller says. Typical. The Blaze says Supreme Court rules 7-2 against Trump admins, similarly deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members under the Alien Enemies Act. Here's what Miller says. Weird how the Supreme Court never ruled that Biden couldn't import vast armies of illegal aliens. See, they know what they're doing. They're playing on the dumbest people in the room. The first point, as you already know I'm going to, is that you didn't care when Biden did. That's a stupid argument. That has no bearing in whether or not this is allowed. You could point out that they violated the law then too, but to say that you didn't care then basically admits you're breaking the law now. Say that's what Israel does. Well, you didn't care about Iraq. We did though, but so you're saying it's a genocide then? And so the point then also says, and never ruled that Biden couldn't import vast armies. Well, that's a stupid thing to say, seeing as how it would be illegal for any president to import illegally lots of enemies. So you have to rule that you're not allowed to break the law. This guy's an idiot. Or rather, he knows he's trying to convince idiots. And so the argument is that you didn't rule, couldn't invade. But the last point is that's not what's happening. This argument that you somehow imported the amount you keep lying about, which is not 20 million, and saying that you imported them all for some illegal invasion, to what end? Show it to me here. What are we talking about? Is it a replacement theory argument? I mean, what is the point? Because what we can prove is that they don't have the evidence to back up that claim. I wouldn't disagree. That's possible. Where's your evidence? Lay out the case. The one thing they never do. Because the reality is you can't prove that he coordinated an invasion with aliens. It's just not the truth. It's simply obvious that it was more nuanced than that, if at least the involvement with a foreign country. And on top of that, you can prove that you're going through even that big, I mean, look, there's so many points you can go into that show very clearly that it's not partisan, that it's about getting you to fall into it like this. But if your argument is that this is a problem because they didn't stop Biden from doing the first thing, because what you're doing is dishonest. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to argue is that we can't give them all their rights because Biden did X, Y, and Z. Look, I'm going to be clear about this yet again. I don't care. If your argument is we need to violate the Constitution for stop talking, I don't care. There's never an excuse for me where I'm going to accept the idea that you need to suspend habeas corpus. It doesn't matter, guys. I am absolutely diametrically opposed to anything like that because, frankly, it's unconstitutional. And so the argument we need to do the bad thing to say it's the same argument during COVID that we all laughed about. There's no asterisk next to shall not be infringed. But Stephen Miller, the Zionist, wants you to make that the case. And he says, SCOTUS must change course, Supreme Court, because Clay Travis wrote there are 20 million illegal aliens. Same point. That's the argument. That's not true. Then you could look the numbers up anywhere, even on conservative places. It's not 20 million. He says the due process in quotes. Again, these are America Firsters putting due process in quotes. What is your implication there? The due process is not real? There's an effort to really undermine the basis of the Constitution by people screaming America First, or that they don't know they're being used, which wouldn't surprise me. He says the due process the Supreme Court has decreed today means it is impossible to ever remove all. Not true. Probably one of the most dishonest statements today. It certainly could mean it would take a long time. But this argument that the right thing is too difficult, that should embarrass people like that. They should get laughed off the internet for saying the right thing to do is too tough. It's going to take too long. We have to do the right thing. It's like they are children in the conversation at this point. This has always been their Democrat long game. And there we go. Back into the left-right paradigm while the government laughs at people like Clay Travis doing their work for them. Wake up, guys. You're being played, whether he knows it or not. Now, the U.S. government's flagrant attack on free speech, Mohammed Khalil, is just the beginning. We did that show on March 13th. And I think actually for time, I'm going to skip this, but I'll go through this in a future show. Really what it was is a great article by The Intercept. Government lawyers trying to deport Mohammed Khalil won't stop whining, which is pretty much what they're doing. But if you read the article, they're basically going back to the court where the simple point was the judge just simply said, provide your case. Give me the evidence and the case studies, the case law that makes your case, make your argument. Like you guys, you're pushing back on whether like you saying you want to use this to deport Khalil. Well, there's no evidence of a crime. What's your case? Lay out your reasoning. And they come back and they go, we don't have enough time. There's too many cases. And you guys are distracting us. Like this is the argument. And the judge was like, that's ridiculous. That's what they're doing, guys. This is what the current DOJ is doing. They also make a good argument in the article about how the Trump administration has basically gutted the DOJ. You're not going to have any real problem for me, except for the fact that the DOJ is now packed with people that are going to blindly follow ideological lines, which is what they're doing everywhere. Look at the Bondies and the Gnomes, guys. These are not the best of the best. These are the people that will follow suit. That's where we are. But my point in this is they're still trying to deport Khalil despite everything because they're desperate. And I think this is the one not to forget that goes directly back to it's now been proven in a court of law that Batar USA, the group is a Zionist organization from Israel that is hand-delivering lists to the U.S. government that they're then using to deport people without any further look. The court made that clear. Now, we're not even talking about Khalil. Khalil was the first one. This guy, he was the very first example. Batar tagged Bondi and Trump and Rubio and said, get this guy. And he was the first one they grabbed with nothing more than that. They manufactured a whole case. They even claimed he had a Visa card, but no, he had a green card. Rubio got called out on that. And they didn't even look into it, guys. The point is here. Where was it? Oh, right here. That the judge called this out in the court document that said that the Batar tweet was the only thing they had. Turned out they lied about him. The case broke down because they couldn't prove anything else. He got released. But 48 hours they held this guy, and they tried to deport him because of that tweet alone. We need to realize how clear this is. The government is being allowed to be driven by Zionists because of a statement on Twitter. That's it. And they're deporting people because of it. Actually, I forgot. I have the tweet right here. It exposes how the Trump administration stripped a guy of a student visa because Batar tweeted about him. They issued an arrest warrant for 48, just 48 hours afterward. Oh, I thought it was, I remember maybe I'm conflating two of the stories. Sorry, there's so many illegitimate arrests and deportations. So it says, during this time, a profile for petitioner appeared on the website of Canary Mission, one of the obvious Zionist games in this, that claims its mission is to document individuals and promote hatred of the United States, which, by the way, you have a right to hate whoever you want. The profile of the petitioner discusses the events of November 3rd. On April 8th, Batar Worldwide. Batar Worldwide, an organization that claims its mission is to empower Jews to stand strong, speak out, and defend its heritage and Israel against all threats, tweeted an image from them, along with an image the tweet claimed to have submitted this person's name for deportation. So they literally point to this guy and said, deport this guy, and tag them. Sent this to, and this is on the list they sent to people in the White House or in the State Department. It appears the petitioner's name had, in fact, recently been submitted for deportation on April 9th. Just a day after the tweet, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the State for Visa Services sent a memo to ICE regarding the revocation of that person's visa, effective the same day. The Department of Homeland Security issued that on, this is unbelievable. They issued that administrative warrant for the arrest, claiming the execution of a charging document to initiate removal proceedings against their subject as the basis for arrest. It broke down. So we need to understand that all of this could very well be based on simply Israel asking for it. That's what's so insane about this. Now, it says, if this is a tweet from Sarah, it looks like it's GB News. A couple things that stood out from the ICE oversight hearing. ICE acting director Todd Lyons said 9 people have died in ICE custody since January 20th. 9. From Representative Underwood, 41,000 detentions, beds funded for fiscal year 24. Current bed count, over 52,000 beds. We already know this. We told you this in the beginning. They did not have enough places. So 9 people have died. Sounds very similar to what Israel's doing. And he says, if Lyons is right that 9 people have died in custody since January 20th, that means that 5 of them have died in the last month and haven't been reported to the public as required, since ICE's list of databases deaths doesn't have anyone new since April 8th. And he did follow up and says they've been told that they have notified Congress about these other 5 deaths, yet haven't posted the information. Just insane. Now, this really is unnerving. Kristi Noem is proposing a reality TV show where immigrants compete for fast-track citizenship. I really just think that they're trying to push this to a point that is comically stupid. Like, I'm not sure why, or they're just this gross. Like the idea that you think it makes sense to make a reality TV show about people suffering to try to fight for something that, like your country's murdering them. Let's see who can win and stop themselves from being killed by Israel's bombs. I mean, it's just insane to me. And you know what? I'll go through this in another show too, since the time it'll take me a while to read through this, but just make sure you understand this. I'll include it in the show notes. They're trying to create a reality TV show. It's literally being called The American. I mean, it's gross. We'd like to pretend we're better than this. Now, I'd like to think that we are. They're not, though. I think this is not a representation of America's values, of Americans in general. I think it's about something else. Now, on top of that, by the way, in case you didn't see this, Tulsi Gabbard recently fired the people who put out the report that showed that Tren de Aragua was not controlled by Maduro, which is factually backed up. I went through my own report that wasn't tied to what the government found. Their own people showed Tulsi Gabbard that it's not, that's controlled by outside forces. And let's not forget, it was founded in Los Angeles, by the way. The point, all right, what was that, MS-13? I think that was Tren de Aragua. Either way, the point is it's not, the evidence has been shown that it was controlled not by Maduro. Of course, that could also be a lie. But what's interesting is they showed that to her, and then she fired them. The moment anyone in the government advances facts and evidence that contradicts the official line, they get fired. That seems to be pretty obvious by now. And it says right there that, yes, Grok says they did fire them. So is that what you want? Ideological control? Like I said, Bondi, the rest, they're people that follow suit. That's why they want them. That's what they're doing in every position, in every location we can see. That's what everyone that supports them do online, rather the partisan games. It is blind adherence to their game. Oh, and this, I'll play this clip. It's not that long. This is a clip showing you, Intercept put this out, showing you what this is really about. We've shown you all the different overlaps and Khalil and Ozturk and going after people that call out and expose the Zionist genocide. Now, what this is really about is stopping that. And Israel and Greenblatt and ADL working with Twitter, they've made this clear. This is a quick little clip that shows you that as he writes, the Republicans sneak nonprofit killer bill into the tail end of Trump's 389-page tax plan. And what it's about is them being able to kill any nonprofit that they don't like associated with Palestine is what it really comes down to.
A bill last year that would have let Trump crush nonprofit groups, it's back. On Monday, House Republicans released a plan that's going to go into Trump's big, beautiful bill. And overall, it's their proposal to slash trillions in government spending. It's 389 pages long. And on page 380, all the way at the very end, is a provision that would grant Trump's Treasury Secretary the power to unilaterally strip the nonprofit status from any group that the Trump administration deems as supporting terrorism.
And that's really what all this comes down to, right? I mean, and this is everywhere you look right now. And if we know they can arbitrarily declare anybody a terrorist, then it's meaningless, guys. You know, just saying, well, this gang is now a terrorist group because that makes it easier for us to act. Or declaring Palestinians or anybody else, or just, you know, like the point they always make with Somalia, basically saying you're on the terrorist watch list, but if you align with Israel, we'll take you off. And so the point is either that they were never, if they were either never actually terrorists, right? If nothing's changed now, and they're using that to coerce them to align with Israel, which is what's really happening in my opinion, or they were terrorists and they don't care as long as they align with Israel, which also makes sense. It's everywhere you look. And so in this case, you already know they're just declaring anything Palestinian terrorist. They already have done that. So if they get this passed, which it seems like they will, they'll be able to just yank these things out by the roots. And you'll have all the hypocritical people out there claiming they're supporting the Constitution because they dislike the politics of these people. It's like everywhere else. If you didn't stand up for Khalil, then you don't believe in these things. If you didn't stand up for, I mean, you could go down the list. It's the same conversation anywhere. If you're being guided by partisan like with COVID-19, right? There's very clearly people, like when you saw that overlap with Israel, there were people standing up that were calling out what was going on. And because they had pink hair, far too many people acted like it was somehow, they ignored it. Which if you can't see by now, that's how this is designed to work, you need to pay attention more.
Supporting terrorism is already illegal, but during the first 100 days of the Trump administration, they've shown that they are willing to apply that label to anybody when it's convenient, from college students to organizations to activists. The Intercept covered this last year when Democrats were trying to force this through at the behest of pro-Israel organizations. They saw this as a useful tool to crush the pro-Palestinian movement. And if this is passed, civil liberties organizations have warned that this strips these groups of their due process. And in its prior version, it did not require the Treasury Department to provide any evidence for this claim. It is extremely worrying. And as it makes its way through the legislative process, The Intercept will be following it every step. Head to theintercept.com to read the full story.
Right. So, obvious same point, due process. Right? So, except here's the difference though, guys. Now we're talking about Americans. Yeah, maybe it's not about deportation, not yet, even though they floated deporting Americans 5 different times. It's obvious what this is really, if you are on guard about these things, if you believe in constitutional rights or believe in the Constitution, what they're talking about is creating a loophole for them, or rather an unconstitutional law, which would therefore be repugnant to the Constitution, and therefore, because of Supreme Court ruling Mayberry versus Madison, it would be technically illegal. It would be null and void, but they don't care about that. The point is that by saying you cannot have to go to revoke these without giving them due process, well, that's one more step in the direction of just that doesn't matter when they decide so, based on now calling you a terrorist, but later just calling you national security, inconvenient, or just no longer needing an argument. Every moment is going forward. I know you see it out there. Call it out. Now, we talked about El Salvador and sending Americans and the overlap therein. Well, a few points I want to go over here. This is going out strong. Tag me in this. Now, we actually already covered some of this, not everything in the video, so make sure you watch it. This is it's a Gray Zone video entitled Bukele's Secret Deal with the Devil Exposed. Now, we've talked about most of this, and so I'll show you that tweet or the show, but it says El Salvador, has turned into a dystopian, tyrannical nightmare. Estimates are over 80,000 innocent people locked up in their phony state of emergency. It's all propaganda. So it's worth watching. Now, we recently covered this point. It's not the title, but this was about the deal, the drop site news. Actually, I probably can grab that. Yeah, right there. This is a great article you should read. Secret Bukele deal lies behind Trump's El Salvador deportations. Now, in this, it's very clear. Like even the previous U.S. government people were on the record saying they basically are working with these gangs, MS-13. They're working with them. And they basically manufactured this, like, the decline in violence. And some of the ones currently in the United States are the ones that are potentially possibly going to speak out about that. And he handpicked them and said they want them back. And we already saw Pam Bondi. There was a case they were going to put someone in prison for well before this started, an MS-13 leader, who they dropped the charges and sent him to El Salvador. A guy who's working with them. You know, it's just... It shows you they don't care about what they're claiming they care about, guys. And so that's what this discussion is about, these deals. Not just about working with them, but also about the larger agenda that's coming around this. And I think it has to do with the overlap with Israel, and it has to do with the technocratic globalist agenda that we're seeing build. And on that note, as I highlighted here, a great report from Alan McLeod on something we recently discussed. And here's the actual tweet, or I'll just show you the actual article. Bukele's El Salvador dictatorship. Made in Israel, which is the case. And as I said, we already recently talked about this, but I'll read this article. It does a good job breaking this down. It says, from arming his security forces to supplying him with weapons and high-tech surveillance tools, Mint Press explored the Israeli influence helping to prop up the man who calls himself the world's coolest dictator. Since Bukele's ascension to the presidency in 2019, Israeli exports to El Salvador have been rapidly advancing, growing at an annual rate of more than 21%. This increase consists primarily of weapons. Salvadorian forces are well supplied with Israeli hardware. The military and police use the Israeli-made Galil and ARD-5 rifles and Uzi machine guns like they supplied in Rwanda. Numerous Israeli pilots and ride in AIL Storm and Plasian Yagu armored vehicles. Some equipment Salvadorian forces use come free, courtesy of Israeli sources. In 2019, an Israeli NGO and Jerusalem Foundation, a group that builds illegal settlements on Palestinian land, by the way, announced that it would donate $3 million worth of supplies to the Salvadorian police and military. You know, right when it was necessary for him to seize control. Sure, that didn't have any overlap, though. For others, however, the Bukele administration is paying top dollar, meaning this relationship is extremely profitable for the high-tech Israeli defense sector. Now, here's my point. That happened afterward, in my opinion. The 2019 donation was to help them secure control. That's what I believe. Now, in 2020, the Salvadorian police paid around $3.4 million for 1 year's use of 3 Israeli spyware products. Starting to sound familiar? You know this already. This is how Israeli cyber weapons are taking over Latin America. We talked about the NSO group, the Pegasus. It's all the same stuff, guys. This is an infiltration around the world. And now there's this weird overlap with the U.S. and the same group, the deportation, which that will end with a quick point about that. I mean, more to come. It's very clear where this is all leading. Now, he says these tools include GeoLock, a program that intercepts calls and texts from targeted phones, and Web Tangles, which uses individual social media accounts to build up files on people, including using their photos for facial recognition. See, all this interconnects. A third, WaveGuard tracer, marketed it in some regions as Guardian, tracks users' movements through the GPS on their phone. Perhaps the most notorious piece of spyware, don't forget, they've suspended civil liberties, so none of this, nobody cares. There's no restriction on what they can do. Perhaps the most notorious piece of spyware used, however, is Pegasus. Surprise, surprise. The one that's becoming hot and big and being allowed to rip through this country yet again, thanks to Donald Trump, as well as the overlapping many different Israeli spy tech groups that are proliferating under this new administration. Derek's covered all of it. Developed by the NSO group, who, by the way, that one I'll grab really quickly, was literally found guilty in a recent case around WhatsApp. That same group. Israeli spyware firm NSO Group found liable for hacks of WhatsApp users. It's a spyware company. It's not about helping anybody other than them and the group. So the government uses it to spy on its own people. That's what they're using it for. An outgrowth that says the most notorious Pegasus, developed by the NSO Group, an outgrowth of the IDF Unit 8200. The app hit the headlines in 2022 when it was revealed that repressive governments of the world had used it to surveil thousands of public figures, including kings, presidents, politicians, activists, and reporters. El Salvador, one of the most heavily penetrated nations. Surprise, surprise. A report from Citizen Lab found that Bukele administration was using it to secretly monitor dozens of public figures critical of the president, including 22 journalists and independent from the independent outlet El Faro. Now, my question is how much of that is overlap with the people he's trying to put in these prisons? How many people of them that they sent back were somebody that he wanted because if they were information on him? I mean, I think this is a part of the story that is not being really focused on. Incarceration Nation. It says Bukele has used these Israeli tools and weapons to crack down on dissent and opposition to his rule. Since 2022, when he declared the state of exception, that's when they suspended what is their, like the U.S. suspending the Constitution. They suspended rights and civil liberties. He has imprisoned at least 85,000 people, none of which get trials. No one's proving any crimes, so we have no clue. They tell you what they want. A staggering figure for such a small country. Today, around 2% of the adult population, along with over 3,000 children, languish behind bars in dangerously overcrowded jails. But that's totally okay to the ones screaming about human rights and liberty and democracy, right? As long as they get what they want, we don't call it out, or they don't. El Salvador holds vastly more people in prisons per capita than any other country, anywhere. And conditions are among the worst in the world. Is this what we want to be a part of? Apparently for some. Food is sparse. Lights are kept on 24 hours a day. The cells are frequently packed with more than 100 occupants. Those incarcerated at CCOT are allowed no contact with the outside world, not even their families or lawyers. Now, since we know that 75% of the ones they sent didn't even have a criminal record, and many of them were here legally with nothing, are currently there, that should outrage you. And then since they floated Americans next, it should scare you. Often the first thing a Salvadorian family hears about their disappeared relative is news that he died while incarcerated. Oh, we just heard that about ICE places over here. Every day we seem to get closer to this. Torture is commonplace. Osiris Luna, the director of El Salvador's prison system, has even been sanctioned by the U.S. government for his role in gross human rights abuses. But now we're on the same side. Bukele has justified the mass imprisonment of his countrymen as a necessary step to break the power of organized crime, drugs, and cartel gangs. Yeah. Oh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Now, is it because they're fighting those things, or is it because he secretly made deals with them to basically seize control? That's what our own government was saying before. That's what people in the world are talking about, but not now, not with Israel's involvement and the Zionist government taking over. Oh, I meant the U.S. one, by the way. Yet a significant portion of those held are his political opponents. Easy to prove. Among those detained are union leaders, politicians, human rights defenders. It speaks for itself. And the world's coolest dictator. This is alarming how few people seem to be willing to call this out. Maybe because they're worried they're going to end up there. Amid the chaos, Bukele has fired tens of thousands of public service workers and reduced taxes on the business community. He has also reoriented El Salvador's foreign policy from a progressive anti-imperialist state stance to allying itself with right-wing governments around the world, including Israel. We're seeing these shifts happen. And it's not left versus right? It's ultimately about, people who respect rights and those don't. That's what it comes down to. In the wake of October 7th assault, Bukele voiced his support for Israel and condemned Hamas. As a Salvadorian of Palestinian ancestry, I'm sure the best thing that could happen to the Palestinian people is for Hamas to completely disappear, he said, describing Hamas as savage beasts and compared them to MS-13, one of their most violent gangs. Doesn't that sound familiar? It's almost like they all have the same talking points. Now, again, if you're going to call it MS-13 or rather Hamas, wouldn't you include that Israel been funding them for the division? But of course, as a Palestinian, he would care about that if he was being honest. The connections between Israel and El Salvador, however, predate Bukele by decades. During the 1970s and 80s, the country was a hotspot for the Cold War. The U.S.-backed death squads battled the leftist FMLN rebels. The military regime killed around 75,000 civilians in a dirty war that scars the region to this day. The violence was so extreme and so well publicized that even the United States sought to distance itself from it. Into that void stepped Israel, as usual, providing 83% of El Salvador's military needs during the worst time. So guys, you can't hide this. They chose to align themselves with the most radically racist people in the world. They sought out people that were willing to hurt somebody. Rwanda, Bosnia, any one of these locations, you cannot decouple that. It's transparent. I mean, you can look it up on Wikipedia for crying out loud. Again, doesn't mean you can prove it because Wikipedia gets wrong all the time, but it shows mass adoption that everyone's willing to acknowledge that, yes, Israel was involved with the Rwanda genocide, which is important to understand. I covered this myself. They were the ones giving the Uzis and then stoking the division. I mean, it's all on the record. It's not hard to find. My point is that you can see that even in this example, Israel stepped in and started funding them during the worst example of their history of genocide, of killings. And it says, including napalm. In return, El Salvador moved its embassy to Jerusalem, legitimizing Israel's claim to the city. Lovato, a former member of the FMLN, told Mint Press News the country was turned into a laboratory for repression. During the Civil War, he says, the U.S. government aligned a whole panoply of different practitioners of torture and mass murder. If you can't see by now throughout history that the U.S. government, like even to this day, have been, the Gina Haspel, funny, I finally remember her name off the top of my head, but that Trump brought on, it was like the torture queen. The point is that they've always continued this. In UAE and Yemen, they continue their torture prisons, which we covered back then. So the point is that it's not unique. The U.S. government has found ways to do this. On Guantanamo, that's who they are. And it doesn't mean us. It means the power structure that's always guided it. And says you had trainers from Taiwan, Israel, and other countries going to El Salvador to train the Salvadorian government to do what they had learned how to do. It says one of the most notable individuals who received Israeli training was Major Roberto Diabusion, leader of a far-right death squad. Diabusion is known to have ordered the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero, nicknamed Blowtorch Bob, for his penchant for using the tool on his opponent's genitals. His death squad is thought to have killed some 30,000 people, many of whom were tortured to death. Thus, it is no stretch to say that El Salvador's repressive state apparatus has long been sustained by Israel's money, tech, and know-how. But this is far from an isolated example. Indeed, Israel supplied weapons and training to repressive governments around the world, honing the skills acquired suppressing the Palestinian population and taking them global. Guatemala, we've talked about before. General Efren Rios Montt thanked Israel for his participation in a coup that brought him to power in 1982. Surprise, surprise. There's many examples, by the way. In Colombia, where the country's most notorious death squads were trained by Israeli operatives. Israel also armed and supported the military dictatorships of Chile, Argentina, like the worst in history, guys, in the 70s and the 80s, even as the latter explicitly targeted over 1,000 Jews in the latest slaughter of Jews the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. Israel supported that because you have to understand Zionism doesn't care about the Jewish people. They care about using them to achieve their goals. Like you can find in UN documents that show they didn't want the Jews to come from Europe. But they wanted them to, because they then basically on the record said that they wanted to make sure they stayed because or even in Palestine when they first took it, there's Jews on the ground that said, this does not align with what we believe. And they killed them too. All of this is easy to recognize, but spouting it off on the side, people will dismiss it because they want to. I've covered the UN document itself that highlighted what the Zionist group were telling them. But there's another example, linked right here. You can read it for yourself. In Nicaragua, Israel supplied the Somoza dictatorship. In Rwanda, it sold weapons to the Hutu government as it was carrying out a genocide against the Tutsi population. On and on and on and on. That is Israel's legacy. Lastly, it's been reported that Donald Trump administration is working on a plan to move 1 million Palestinians to Libya. Now, waiting to go more on this because it's just being floated. These days, they float all kinds of stuff, but most of it seems to at least somewhat come to pass. The bottom line is this is exactly what most of us were saying the moment this started after October 7th. They're going to ethnically cleanse them. They're going to destroy the whole area. Now, despite all the narrative in between those things, look at what happened. Whole area is destroyed. They've all been ethnically cleansed. Now they're trying to move them to the play. Weird. Exactly like we told you. And if you paid attention, exactly like they were saying they were going to do. How dumb it is that we have to play this game where it was all there on the surface and we told you they were saying it, they're now doing it, and we still dispute whether it's reality. That's Zionist propaganda for you. And I said, so was this deportation chaos? Right now, with all this going on, and even the floating of the idea of Libya, they already said we're going to send to Libya, right? Or I forget the other place. I forget, but they floated 2 different locations. Libya was one of them. And it was just confirmed the Trump administration had almost sent a dozen men from Vietnam, Philippines, Laos, Mexico to Libya. Mexico to Libya. Like, what the hell? It's just insane what's happening. And it says a country described as a hellscape for migrants, where many have been sold into slavery, that even the U.S. government currently says nobody should go there. It's unsafe. And he wants that to be the safe zone for them. The point is that they stopped this. They were just about to send them all, and they got stopped. Why were they trying to rush this random collection of people, some of them from Mexico, to Libya? Well, that's what I'm asking. Is it possible that this deportation chaos we've been seeing is at least in some way a trial balloon to gauge, normalize, prepare us for this happening to Palestinians? At this point, it wouldn't surprise me. Like, just to do this so we can normalize the idea of taking an entire population and moving them, and maybe the Afrikaners for the same point in reverse. We're just trying to help them, move them over here to Libya. Well, no, they don't want to go to Libya. And on top of that, 1 million? What about the other 1.5 million? What about that? Oh, that's right. They killed them all, because that's really what's going on. And that means they know that, basically. I mean, it's just so grotesque, and I know you all see it. Now, White House working on a plan to send 1 million Palestinians to Libya, antiwar.com. Make sure you're following them. The Donald Trump administration is attempting to bribe one of the warring parties in Libya, because that's how we do this today, to accept 1 million Palestinians in Israel that Israel's attempting to cleanse from Gaza. So not like trying to set them up in any way like they promised, but just bribing them to dump them over there in Libya, in a place that's in a war zone. It's a war zone. We've talked about this throughout the years, back when it was a focal point. But let's remember, let's not forget that they liberated this location, right? They saved it. They made it a freedom democracy pillar, and then they started selling open slaves, and it's never been the same since. But Trump will tell you we liberated them. It's safe. Or, I mean, he probably won't, since it wasn't his administration, or it was the Clinton dynamic, but the point is the same. Syria, any of the rest. That's liberation. How can you not see by now that what that means to them is destruction? Raping the resources, the people, zone, everything, destroying the country, taking what you want, and claiming you're saving them by giving them democracy. When what you really do is fund the worst of the worst, allow them to take power, like in Syria, and then go, we did it, it's safe, and it's totally not. You guys are the biggest villains on the planet. I mean, what you do every single day and what you act like you're doing is so disgusting to me. It makes me worry for the future. But also recognize how many people are calling it out, which gives me hope. But the point, if they're bribing one of these groups, and we know that it's a warring dynamic, how in the world are we pretending like this makes sense at all? Libya became a failed state after the U.S.-led regime change war against longtime dictator, or rather they call it a dictator, Muammar Gaddafi. You could argue he ruled as a dictator from the sense of like unilateral power, but look, the reality of the place is not the same as what, and Anti-War reports this accurately. Highest quality of life in all of Africa, free college, free healthcare, free medicine. I mean, it's insane. It was very, very clear. And whether it was the gold dinar point they were trying to make with money, or it was the fact that he was pushing back on NATO, they killed him for it. Literally tried to ultimately resign in a way, and they wouldn't let it happen. And then they murdered him. He got raped to death in the streets. That's what they did. And Clinton laughs about it. Now, it says, according to NBC News, multiple U.S. officials confirmed the Trump administration was in negotiations with one of Libya's competing governments. In exchange for that, for the resettling of Palestinians, the administration would potentially release to Libya billions of dollars of funds that the U.S. froze. Oh, that sounds very similar to the Iran-Biden point. So couldn't we, by the same logic, say that Trump's going to bribe Libya and give them back money to a bunch of terrorists? Lou will probably say that, because she calls out anything related to anybody with brown skin as somehow racist and jihadi. What's funny, though, is Biden gave back money that they took from Iran. Now, you could criticize about that, but to frame that as bribing, giving them money, it's lazy. It's a partisan game. Same point as always. For them, it'll be some kind of freeing them and liberating their money when the other side will call something. What you're doing is you stole money from them in the first place. Now you're giving it back to them, but not to them, to a bunch of warlords that the Libya doesn't exist, guys. The country's gone. It is a split, broken, fractured idea, just like they're trying to do in Syria and everywhere else. They'll never change it on the map, though, because they want you to pretend like everything's great. But it says the NBC News report did not specify if the U.S. was talking with the Tripoli-based government led by Abdul Hamid Dabaya or the Eastern government led by Khalifa Haftar, who we've reported on, who will believe, if nothing's changed, is still backed by the UN. What's funny to me is that they'll go with whatever they want. Suddenly, it just shows you that it's about whatever they can get. They will work, as we've seen with Hamas or the moderate rebels or anybody else. They will work with the worst of the worst of the worst and call them the rebels as long as they get what they want. Now it says Libya has been in a state of civil war since the U.S.-backed jihadist-linked rebels overthrew Gaddafi in 2011. Both Libyan governments are accused of serious human rights abuses. That's very clear. And the State Department directs Americans not to travel anywhere in the state due to terrorism, unexploded landmines, civil unrest, kidnapping, armed conflict. But yeah, quite the safe zone for Palestinians. It's insulting. The report comes as both Netanyahu and Trump have discussed proposals for massive displacement of Palestinians in recent days, which again, regardless of whether they do not want to go, and they're simply acting like it's saving them, they don't want to leave their land. So this is ethnic cleansing and mass displacement. It's a war crime within a genocide. It's not debatable. You can see what they're doing and you can listen to them. They don't want to go. So as they're now, this is my point about the worst of the worst. So they've put them in this position, and then they point to what they did and say that we're trying to help them. We want to make their life better. How dare they be left in this terrible location? So not only do they do it, but they want you to praise them for doing something worse. A murderer, as always, is a murderer, and they're terrible. But a murderer who then says, praise me for helping them after they kill people is like the worst thing on the planet. He added, I'd be proud to have the United States. Oh, wait, it goes on to say, the report comes as both Netanyahu and Trump discussed proposals for displacement. On Friday, the American leader said, I have concepts for Gaza that I think are very good. Make it a freedom zone. Here we go. So don't say 15-minute city. Understand, we're now on Freedom City, okay? Just so you're getting along with talking points. And he says, let the United States get involved and let's make it a freedom zone. So it's funny how this oscillates, right? So first he says, we'll take it and make it great. And then people in the fake news, which they're all liars, comes up and says, so what about the legalities? Are you going to take Gaza? We're not going to take it. What do you mean? We're making things up, fake news. And then comes back later and says, we're going to take it. I honestly think it's about disjointedness, about constantly saying the false thing and then the right thing. And then so nobody knows where to look. Everyone falls in line with their side. I really do think that's part of it. Because they say things that shift back and forth every day. They all do it. He added, I'd be proud to have the United States have it, take it, and make it a freedom zone. So when somebody tomorrow goes, are you going to take it? Oh, what are we talking about? It's exactly what he did last time. And have good things happen. He'll give you an ambiguous response about how it might be this, might be that, but yet says things just like this. Put people in homes where they can be safe, and Hamas is going to have to be dealt with. You see, he can't even put that aside because that is the only thing Israel wants to. We won't stop until we go after Hamas. So if you remove all the Palestinians, how do you know Hamas is gone? Wouldn't they possibly be in the tunnels? They're never going to give up the argument as long as they can use it. So right now, moving them into homes. What homes are we talking about, Trump? Or whose money are you going to use to build these things out? Probably American tax dollars. Because that's everything Israel's American tax dollars. Trump floated a similar proposal early in his administration. He did. At the time, he said the Palestinians would be removed from the Strip and sent to live in refugee cities in third world countries. Discussing the war in Gaza earlier this week, Netanyahu said Israel was prepared to force about 1 million. Making sure you understand he's talking about 1 million, which means he knows how many they've killed, but was still seeking a country willing to take the refugees. They're already refugees right now. But there is one problem: we need countries to receive them. This is what we are working out right now. If you give them an exit, I'm telling you that more than 50% will leave. In my opinion, much more. He's just lying. They've made this argument every time, and every time they all stand up and say, we're never leaving. We'll die to defend our territory. Just like most American conservatives would. But of course, you can call them terrorists for doing the same thing you would if a foreign country took over Florida, but to each their own. And of course, the last point here, this is how this always goes, right? So we're talking about this video, which I'll probably go over at least some of it in the next show, because I do want to make the overarching points of how they're playing this game. How Jones comes out and says, like I told you, I predicted he would cut ties with Netanyahu, which hasn't happened yet. And clearly that's not what's happened. I mean, it may well happen. I made the point a long time ago that if it was going to happen, Netanyahu would be the most obvious scapegoat. And if it did, then whether Biden or Trump, they would not stop being aligned with Israel. But I won't say I know that like he would. And of course, to him, Ukraine war ended 3 months ago. Absolutely over. We knew it. We predicted it. And now it's not. And so this game they play. If you, like I said before, if you predict everything at one point or another, like over a 24-hour period, you predict every possibility in different parts of your show, then you're never wrong. Right? That's how this works, guys. Listen to people that work with them. They'll tell you how dishonest they are. He says the Trump administration is working on a plan to move 1 million people from Gaza to Libya. He goes, this report comes just days after Trump called for a better future for the people of Gaza in a speech in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, is that what he did? Except all the 75 other points you ignore where he said they're all Hamas and Hamas is the problem and they're all starving them, when that's a lie, and he knows it's a lie. What he's doing is manufacturing the lie that will give Israel the excuse to keep killing them all or illegally displace them. None of this is compassionate. And your effort to just blindly frame this as helping them because of a better future is sycophantic. You're supporting whatever Trump says that day, which is what all the rest of you do. The bottom line is this is a crime. Removing them to a new country is a crime. Is that what about the people of Libya? Do they want that? Do you guys not care because they're Libya? You guys are all gross and obviously hypocritical. Every single one of you that ignore all of these things for your partisan arguments. Jason Hinkle, somebody points out at the end, here's what was happening as far as I can tell. And this overlaps with the Israeli-American hostage, or rather IDF member that was a detainee. He says the U.S. agreed with Hamas to release Eden Alexander in exchange for lifting the siege. Eden was released, but Trump betrayed his promise. Israel continues to starve Gazans. Did anybody actually think for a second that even if Trump believed that they would do that Israel would stop? Can you not watch for a year after every possible combination of things happens and they still ignore anything? They just not only ignore it, they stand up and shoot people in the face on live TV and then look around and challenge everybody. It's insane to me that we ever thought that would change. I always hope. The point was they lied or they thought it would, and then Israel double-crossed everybody, or they all knew it was a lie. They promised they would stop and they didn't. Now realize that as they were doing that, they could have killed Eden. And this guy, what's funny is they make all this big case about an American. The reality is he is an Israeli who has American citizenship, which is still an American, but it's different as an IDF member who was in the IDF, who got taken as an IDF member killing people in Palestine. And yet, what about all the Americans that were there from the beginning? 600 plus that NPR told you were in Gaza to begin with? It's funny how the Stefanics and Trumps and everybody else, Rubios, never cared about any of them. In fact, some of them who were just Americans, who weren't Palestinian Americans, who were, white Americans that were in there because they married somebody, but they don't care about them. In my opinion, no one matters more than the other. Human life matters. But they sure as hell only care about something with an Israeli in their name. That's not my opinion. Just look. He says, it seems the U.S. objective was to clear out this one American citizen prior to letting Israel impose its violent endgame. That does kind of seem like what happened. Meanwhile, the U.S. has been pressing Libya to take 1 million Palestinians who will be ethnically cleansed by Israel. Libya, the U.S. is using this country that they destroyed in 2011, and which remains extremely weak and vulnerable to imperial pressure. Exactly. He says, evil doesn't even begin to describe what we're witnessing, all with the complicity of Western leaders and the cowardly silence of Western press. He says, this puts the recent media statements, mediocre and belated acknowledgments of the genocide into perspective, right? Now they're suddenly able to call it out. They understand that this is the end game, and then they are scrambling to get their little statements out before the unspeakable occurs. So they have some modicum of deniability when the world looks back and wonders how this was allowed to happen. The statements from The Guardian, Financial Times, BBC, New York Times, etc. Don't be fooled. There is no conviction there. The editors of these institutions, some of the most powerful institutions in the world, let a genocide happen on their watch, and they said nothing. It's unforgivable. The blood can never be washed from their hands. They have sacrificed not only their humanity, but the humanity of all of us. And this is another tweet from Jeremy Scahill. Hamas says Steve Witkoff personally promised that they would lift the blockade, and they never did. The U.S. broke the deal, according to Hamas. They threw it in the trash. I don't even know why they trust them at this point, but I guess they don't have any other choice. They worth a shot. But it's pretty clear where we are. I'll leave it there for today. Overall, I mean, I don't want to, hopefully you will question even what we're talking about, especially my opinions. And I hope it's very clear, and I make it clear, I believe, when I'm giving you my opinion. But as far as I'm concerned, the facts, the evidence, I don't know how you can see anything different. In regard to the central point of all of this, and I don't even mean foreign policy, I mean specifically like the dangerous path that the U.S. government has been going well before Trump's administration, well before his last administration. We've been on a very clear path that hasn't slowed down. In fact, it gets faster every administration, and usually under the guise of stopping the one from before. As James put it, it's a constant step. They're stepping stone from the next, and we're continuing, and it's happening in real time. And I am very much of the mind that you guys all see it. Stand up and call it out. I say the same thing every time. As much as you may not think it makes a difference, I know it makes a difference. I see it every single day. I wouldn't do this every day if I didn't feel like it was making a difference. And I see it. I know it. And I don't mean necessarily we're going to win, whatever that means, or change the outcome, but I do believe even reaching one person, whoever you are out there, just found this show and you're going, man, this is exactly, that is what I do this for. And not that I want you to think the same thing I think, but to instill the ideas of objective research, right? Questioning everything, being critical of all opinions, considering all perspectives. That's what I'm hoping you take away from this. I can be wrong. My opinions can be off. I mean, it's about you doing that and applying it to me as well. And hopefully showing other people around us the same idea, being willing to question these things and not blindly adhere to a partisan line, and really understanding how dangerous that truly is. Thank you for being here. Please find a way to support this platform if you believe in what we're doing. We put out, long form shows, getting back to hopefully 5 days a week. Articles coming out again, getting back to hopefully multiple articles throughout the week. But just the long-term work, the different shows. Now we have the IMA group, different podcasts we're doing. My point is, if you believe in all of this, all for free, all just because we believe in the work, and whether or not you decide to give anything for it, I do it because of the content. But if you find value in that content, recognize that we can't keep doing that without your support. So help us share that. If you already support us, show it to somebody new. Demonstrate to them our value in that and ask them to support us. But just being here, sharing the link, that's really what's important. So thank you for tuning in. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Oh, you know what? I did want to say on the way out, just because I thought this earlier. We talk about a lot of rough things, things that really weigh on you. And so it's always important. And I mean, honestly, I think you guys can tell. I myself am more concerned than I have been, almost ever. There's more obvious reasons, not to mention, aside even from the ongoing massive genocide, to just feel that we're in a kind of a dangerous path. But at the same time, like I said, the reason I think we're getting to this dark position is because the power structure is losing control. And that causes things to feel more uncomfortable. My point, though, is that I've used to kind of try to lean in every now and again to, at least highlight, there's a lot of good things in the world, a lot of good people fighting for good reasons. And I feel like I less do that today because I myself am kind of getting more consumed by how clearly there's bad things, but I got to remind myself the same thing. Every single person in the chat watching, everybody in the community who is helping each other, who's, just everything about this community, what we do, we have to remind ourselves every day that there are good people out there, you guys included, who really believe in doing the right thing for the right reasons. And even the ones that are coming expense, or, that come at a price. The hard thing is, usually worth doing, despite the difficulty, despite the price. And my point is that don't forget, don't lose sight of the fact that there are a lot, I'd like to believe more often than not, the majority of people out there that believe in what we're doing, that believe in fighting for the right things and standing up for it. And whether in government, you know me, I'm very pessimistic, but I will never stop hoping for that and looking for those opportunities, looking for the moments I can see that. Because, if we go in a positive direction, for me, that would be in a non-government society, but baby steps. Maybe we get to a point where we start seeing people that are in those positions that maybe do care, but don't, be very skeptical of that more than anything, but don't lose hope. We have to maintain that to see that there is a possible way through this. I really believe that. So all that's to say, I wanted to end with something nice, something that gave a positive feeling, because I know this stuff can weigh on you. And even though it's a video, it's not going to change the world. It's something we played before. It's the Thank You for the Sunshine clip I've just really enjoy. But Let this carry you into a positive feeling today and end the show in a way that reminds you that we do have a lot to be thankful for and a lot of good people out there truly fighting for good things, just like you. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Oh, wanna act too high and mighty, 'cause tomorrow I may fall down on my face. Lord, thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful day. Lord, thank you for sunshine, thank you for rain, thank you for joy, thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful day.
Sometimes life is good, but then the trouble comes my way. But whatever happens, Lord, I thank you for this day. But when I'm feeling troubled, I lift my hands and pray that your will be done in the rain or sun. No, it's a beautiful day.
I don't wanna act too high and mighty, 'cause tomorrow I may fall down on my face. Lord, thank you for sunshine.